ba ay isang rehistradong botante para sa May 9, 2022 elections? Narito ang 12 bagay na hindi mo dapat gawin bago, sa araw mismo at pagkatapos ng eleksyon batay sa Omnibus Election Code at sa mga panuntunan ng Commission on Elections. Huwag ibenta ang iyong boto. Ang pagbili ng boto o pagbenta ng boto ay mahigpit na ipinagbabawal sa ilalim ng Omnibus Election Code. Ito ay may kaukulang parusa ng pagkakakulong mula 1 hanggang 6 na taon, pagkadiskwalipika sa pagsilbi sa isang pampublikong posisyon at pagkawala ng karapatang bumoto. Ang isang partidong politikal na mapapatunayang bumili o nagbenta ng boto ay pamumultahin na hindi bababa sa 10,000 piso. Huwag pagpustahan ang resulta ng eleksyon. Ang kahit na anong pera o bagay na may halaga na itinaya sa pustahan para sa resulta ng eleksyon ay mapupunta sa estado. Huwag pilitin o takutin ang iyong mga subordinates, kabilang ang mga miyembro ng parokya o simbahan, mga kasambahay, o mga nangungupahan para ikampanya o iboto o hindi iboto ang isang kandidato. Huwag pilitin o takutin sa direkta o hindi direktang paraan ang kahit na sinong opisyal o kawani para sa eleksyon. Huwag magdala ng baril sa labas ng iyong bahay o lugar ng trabaho. Kahit na ikaw ang may permit to carry, kailangan mo pa rin ng sulat mula sa COMELEC na nagsasaad na ikaw ay maaaring magbitbit ng baril sa labas. Huwag bumoto ng higit sa 1 beses sa isang eleksyon. Huwag bumoto kung ikaw ay hindi rehistradong botante. Ang double voting o mas kilala sa tawag na flying voter ay may kaukulang parusa ng pagkabilanggo ng hanggang 6 na taon at multa na hanggang 10,000 piso. Huwag bumoto bilang kahalili ng isang rehistradong botante kahit pa may pahintulot. Huwag gumamit ng ibang balota maliban sa ibibigay ng Board of Election Inspectors. Ipinagbabawal din ang pagkakaroon ng higit sa isang official ballot. Huwag picturan ang iyong balota. Hindi rin pinapayagan ang mag-selfie kasama ng iyong balota. Huwag magbitbit ng nakamamatay na armas sa loob ng presinto kung saan ka boboto at sa loob ng radius na 100 metro mula sa presinto sa araw ng eleksyon. Huwag magbenta, mag-alok, bumili, maghain, o kumuha ng alak at iba pang nakakalasing ng inumin 1 araw bago ang eleksyon at sa mismong araw ng eleksyon. Ang mga hotels at establisimento lamang na pinapayagan ng Department of Tourism na magsilbi ng alak sa mga dayuhang turista ang maaaring di masaklawan ng liquor ban. Huwag magdaos o makilahok sa sabong, boxing, karera ng kabayo, hay-alay at iba pang kahalintulad na laro sa araw ng eleksyon. Bawat boto ay mahalaga at ang isang boto ay maaaring magresulta sa 6 na taon na maayos na pamamalakad ng gobyerno at matatag na ekonomiya o 6 na taon na talamak ang korupsyon, mataas ang porsyento ng mga walang trabaho at mas laganap na kahirapan. Protektahan mo ang iyong kinabukasan sa pamamagitan ng hindi pagbenta ng iyong boto. Tandaan, huwag matakot bumoto at bumoto ng tama.
Rehistradong botante ka ba para sa May 9, 2022 nga eleksyon? Aniya ang 12 ka butang nga dili nimo angay buhaton sa panahon og pagkahuman sa eleksyon sumala sa Omnibus Election Code ug kasamtangang giya sa Commission on Elections. Ayaw ibaligya ang imong boto. Ang pagbaligya o pagpalit sa boto Usa ka ginadili nga lihok sa ilalom sa Omnibus Election Code ug aduna kini silot nga pagkapriso ug usa hangtod 6 ka tuig, diskwalipikasyon sa paghawid og pampublikong posisyon ug pagkawagtang sa katungod sa pagboto. Ang bisan unsang partidong politikal nga masakpan nga sad-an mamahimong magmulta og dili ubos sa 10,000. Ayaw pakipusta sa resulta sa eleksyon. Ginadili ang pagpusta sa resulta sa eleksyon. Ang bisan unsa nga kwarta o bililhong butang nga gipusta maadto sa gobyerno. Ayaw pamugos, panghulga o panghadlok sa imong mga sakop, lakip na ang mga parokyano, katabang, saop, ug uban pa sa pangampanya o pagboto alang o batok sa bisan kinsang kandidato. Ayaw pamugos, panghulga o panghadlok sa bisan kinsang opisyal sa eleksyon o empleyado. Ayaw pagdala og mga armas gawas sa imong panimalay o sa lugar sa negosyo. Maski aduna kay permiso sa pagdala niini, manginahanglan gihapon og nakasulat nga pagtugot gikan sa COMELEC. Ayaw pagboto og sobra sa usa sa parehong eleksyon. Ayaw pagboto kung ikaw dili rehistrado nga botante. Ang kaduha nga pagboto o ang ginatawag nga flying voter adunay silot nga 6 ka tuig nga pagkakulong ug multa nga kutob sa 10,000. Ayaw pagboto puli sa laing botante maski aduna o walay pagtugot gikan kaniya. Ayaw paggamit og ubang balota gawas sa gihatag sa Board of Election Inspectors. Illegal usab ang adunay sobra sa usa ka opisyal nga balota. Ayaw pagkuha og litrato sa imong gisulatan nga balota. Ayaw usab pagkuha og selfie kauban ang imong gisulatang balota. Ayaw pagdala og makamatay nga hinagiban sa presinto. Kung diin magboto ug sulod sa 100 ka metros sa adlaw sa eleksyon. Ayaw pagbaligya, pagtanyag, pagpalit, pag-alagad o pag-inom og makahibog nga ilimnon. Usa ka adlaw bag-o ang eleksyon o sa mismong adlaw sa eleksyon. Walay labot sa liquor ban ang mga hotel o ubang establisimento nga gitugutan sa Department of Tourism nga mag-alagad sa mga langyaw nga turista. Ayaw pag-apil o pag-organisa og mga sabong, boxing, lumba sa kabayo, hayalay, o maski unsang kaparehong dula sa adlaw sa eleksyon. Ang matag boto importante, ug ang usa ka boto mamahimo og kalainan sa 6 ka tuig nga maayong pagdumala, kalambuan sa ekonomiya, o 6 ka tuig nga pagkaylap sa korupsyon, mas taas nga datos sa kawalay trabaho ug pagsamot sa kalisod. Protektahi ang imong kaugmaon pinaagi sa dili pagbaligya sa imong boto. Hinumdumi, ayaw kahadlok sa pagboto ug pagboto nga maalamon.
Are you a registered voter for the May 9, 2022 elections? Here are 12 things you should not do before, during, and after the elections based on the Omnibus Election Code and existing guidelines of the Commission on Elections. Do not sell your vote. Vote buying or selling is a prohibited act under the Omnibus Election Code, with penalties of imprisonment for 1 to 6 years, disqualification to hold public office, and forfeiture of one's right to vote. Any political party found guilty would also have to pay a fine of not less than 10,000 pesos. Do not wager on the election result. Betting or wagering on the outcome of an election is prohibited. Any money Kada eleksyon, pumipili ang sambayanang Pilipino ng susunod na lider ng bansa, ng taong magtatakda ng plano at polisiya para sa 6 na taon ng ating kinabukasan. Pero ano nga ba ang hinahanap natin sa isang lider? Sa anong mga kwalifikasyon natin titimbangin ang mga kandidatong nanliligaw para sa matamis nating boto?
Dapat ang leader natin matapang, walang uurungan.
Ang gusto kong kandidato ay yung magaling sumayaw at entertaining.
Gusto ko yung matikas, yung magaling magdala ng sarili.
Sana yung susunod na presidente mayaman na para hindi na mangurakot.
Alam mo bang base sa ating konstitusyon, 5 lang ang kwalifikasyon para sa mga nagnanais tumakbong presidente ng Pilipinas? Una, kailangan natural-born citizen ng Pilipinas. Ikalawa, kailangang rehistradong botante. Ikatlo, marunong bumasa at magsulat. Ika-4, nasa edad na 40 sa araw ng eleksyon. At ika-5, residente ng Pilipinas sa loob ng 10 taon bago ang eleksyon. Simple, hindi ba? Walang itinatakdang kwalifikasyon base sa edukasyon, work experience o kayamanan. Pero simple nga bang tunay ang mga dapat nating hanapin sa susunod na leader ng ating bansa? Ayon kay Commission on Elections spokesperson James Jimenez, marami pa tayong pwede at dapat hanapin.
Very basic o payak ang ating requirements. Ibig ba sabihin nito na yan lang ang kailangan nating hanapin? Siyempre hindi. Yan ang tinatawag nating minimum. Pwede kang maghanap ng mas lampas pa dyan. No? Halimbawa, maghanap ka ng taong merong integridad. Gawin mong necessary ingredient yan. Gawin mong kalakip yan ng pagpili mo kung sino magiging pangulo. Kailangan may integridad, kailangan may kakayanan, kailangan magaling, kailangan matalino, at kailangan nagsasabi ng katotohanan sa bayan. Kasi ang pipiliin natin ay hindi lang basta-bastang tao. Leader natin ang pipiliin natin. Leader natin na bibigyan natin ng napakalaking kapangyarihan. Kapangyarihan over our lives, over our livelihoods, over our country. So, bagaman maliit or payak lamang ang requirements ng konstitusyon, kailangan tayo bilang botante, pag boboto na tayo, kailangan medyo mas mataas naman ang standards natin.
Tunay na marami tayong dapat hanapin na katangian sa susunod na leader ng bayan. Ngayon, higit kailanman, kailangan nating maging mapanuri.
Sa tingin ko bilang botante, kailangan maging mas mapanuri tayo dahil hindi biro ang halalan. Hindi biro ang hinihingi sa atin ng mga kandidatong yan. Gusto nila maging leader natin. Gusto nila magkaroon ng kapangyarihan sa ating kabuhayan, sa ating buhay, sa ating bansa. At dahil dyan, kailangan natin maging mapanuri. Kung jowa mo nga lang pinadadaan mo sa butas ng karayom bago mo sagutin, paano pa kaya yung mga elected leaders natin na may tunay na kapangyarihan sa iyo?
Sabi nga ni Director Jimenez, kung kinikilatis nating maigi ang isang potensyal na jowa bago ibigay ang matamis nating oo, mas lalong higit na dapat nating kilatisin ang mga nanliligaw para sa makapangyarihan nating boto.
Hindi pa kami pwedeng bumoto.
Kaya sana pumili kayo ng tama para sa aming kinabukasan.
Tandaan, huwag matakot bumoto at bumoto ng tama. Painit ng painit ang nalalapit na eleksyon. Pero hindi dapat kalimutan na tayo ay nasa gitna pa ng pandemya at may mga nagsusulputang variants ng COVID-19 na posibleng mas malala. Pakikipagkamay, beso-beso, selfies, may mahigpit na paalala si Commission on Election spokesman James Jimenez.
Well, napakahalaga kasi no, na panatiliin nating ang seguridad ng ating mga mamamayan. Alam naman natin na during the campaign period, talagang ang posibleng tamaan ng COVID, no, dahil dito nga sa ongoing na pandemic natin, ay hindi naman yung mga kandidato o yung kanilang mga campaign staff, kundi yung mga taong nag-a-attend sa kanilang mga rally. Kaya napakahalaga na pangalagaan natin ang kanilang kalusugan. And this responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of the candidates and their campaign teams.
Narito ang mga panuntunang itinakda ng COMELEC sa ilalim ng Resolution number 10732 kung paano matitiyak na ang mga campaign activities para sa May 9, 2022 na eleksyon ay hindi maging COVID super spreader events. Lahat ng kandidato at kanilang mga campaign support staff ay itinuturing na authorized persons outside of residence or APOR kahit ano paman ang alert level system at kanilang vaccination status. Ang face-to-face sorties, rallies, conventions, motorcades, caravans at meeting de avance ay pinapayagan lamang sa mga lugar na nasa ilalim ng alert levels 1, 2 at 3. Ang mga batang may edad 17 pababa at mga nakatatandang may edad 66 pataas at ang may mga kondisyong medikal, kabilang na ang mga buntis, ay bawal dumalo sa mga ganitong aktibidad.
At huwag nating kakalimutan yung mga selfie, mga pagkamay-kamay, pagyakap-yakap, beso-beso. Saglit lang yan. No? Wala pang ilang segundo yan, tapos na yan, lumipas na. Pero pag kayo ay nagkasakit, dahil dyan, pag kayo ay nagka-COVID, mahabang gamutan yan, mahabang bubunuin ng inyong kalusugan yan, at hindi lang yan, pati ng inyong finances. Napakamahal magkasakit ngayon. So, wag nating isasang-alang sa kakunting enjoyment yung mas mahabang problema ng COVID.
Ang indoor campaign ay hindi pinapayagan sa mga lugar na nasa ilalim ng Alert Level 4. Mga outdoor na aktibidad lamang na nasa 30% capacity ang pinapayagan. Kahit na anong meeting, convention, rally, motorcade, caravan o meeting de avance ay hindi pinapayagan sa mga lugar na nasa ilalim ng Alert Level 5. Ang mga kandidato o ang kanilang mga campaign support staff ay pinagbabawalang gawin ang mga sumusunod. Huwag pumasok sa pribadong pamamahay habang nagsasagawa ng house-to-house campaign kahit pa pumayag ang may-ari ng bahay. Bawal ang pakipagkamay, pagyakap, beso-beso, o kahit na anong physical contact sa kandidato o mga kasama nila at sa publiko. Bawal ang makipag-selfie o pagkuha ng litrato na lalabag sa social distancing protocols. Bawal mamahagi ng pagkain o inumin upang maiwasang magtanggal ng face mask ang mga tao.
Ang ating kalusugan at kasiguruhan sa panahon ng pandemya ay nakasalalay sa individual na pananagutan or individual responsibility. Kailangan tayo maging responsible tayo sa sarili nating mga gawa. Kung tayo ay magbibehave in a safe manner, magiging safe tayo lahat. Kung tayo mismo ang lalabag sa mga protocols na itinakda ng ating health authorities, talagang tataas ang tsansa ng infection, no, in our population. So, kailangan doon sa mga botante, doon sa mga nanonood ng mga rally, kayo mismo, magkusa kayo na huwag ninyong gagawin yan.
Tandaan, ang paglabag sa mga health protocols sa mga aktibidad na may kinalaman sa eleksyon ay itinuturing na election offense. Ang mga lalabag sa panuntunang itinakda ay nahaharap sa hanggang 6 na taong pagkabilanggo at multa na hindi bababa sa 10,000 piso. Maaari ding mawala ang karapatang bumoto pag ikaw ay nahatulang guilty sa paglabag sa mga protocols. Tunay na mahirap ang pangangampanya para sa eleksyon, pero sa gitna ng patuloy na public health crisis, ito ay higit pang naging masalimuot. Ang mga kandidato, ang kanilang campaign staff, at ang publiko ay marapat na piliin lagi ang kaligtasan at kalusugan una sa lahat. Tandaan, huwag matakot bumoto at bumoto ng tama. Kung ikaw ay nakakita ng aktibidad na lumalabag sa mga naturang panuntunan sa iyong lugar, huwag mag-atubiling magsumbong sa COMELEC sa kanilang Facebook, Twitter at mobile. Ikaw ba ay isang rehistradong botante para sa May 9, 2022 elections? Narito ang 12 bagay na hindi mo dapat gawin bago, sa araw mismo at pagkatapos ng eleksyon batay sa Omnibus Election Code at sa mga panuntunan ng Commission on Elections. Huwag ibenta ang iyong boto. Ang pagbili ng boto o pagbenta ng boto ay mahigpit na ipinagbabawal sa ilalim ng Omnibus Election Code. Ito ay may kaukulang parusa ng pagkakakulong mula 1 hanggang 6 na taon, pagkadiskwalipika sa pagsilbi sa isang pampublikong posisyon at pagkawala ng karapatang bumoto. Ang isang partidong politikal na mapapatunayang bumili o nagbenta ng boto ay pamumultahin na hindi bababa sa 10,000 piso. Huwag pagpustahan ang resulta ng eleksyon. Ang kahit na anong pera o bagay na may halaga na itinaya sa pustahan para sa resulta ng eleksyon ay mapupunta sa estado. Huwag pilitin o takutin ang iyong mga subordinates, kabilang ang mga miyembro ng parokya o simbahan, mga kasambahay, o mga nangungupahan para ikampanya o iboto o hindi iboto ang isang kandidato. Huwag pilitin o takutin sa direkta o hindi direktang paraan ang kahit na sinong opisyal o kawani para sa eleksyon. Huwag magdala ng baril sa labas ng iyong bahay o lugar ng trabaho. Kahit na ikaw ang may permit to carry, kailangan mo pa rin ng sulat mula sa COMELEC na nagsasaad na ikaw ay maaaring magbitbit ng baril sa labas. Huwag bumoto ng higit sa 1 beses sa isang eleksyon. Huwag bumoto kung ikaw ay hindi rehistradong botante. Ang double voting o mas kilala sa tawag na flying voter ay may kaukulang parusa ng pagkabilanggo ng hanggang 6 na taon at multa na hanggang 10,000 piso. Huwag bumoto bilang kahalili ng isang rehistradong botante kahit pa may pahintulot. Huwag gumamit ng ibang balota maliban sa ibibigay ng Board of Election Inspectors. Ipinagbabawal din ang pagkakaroon ng higit sa 1 official ballot. Huwag picturan ang iyong balota. Hindi rin pinapayagan ang mag-selfie kasama ng iyong balota. Huwag magbitbit ng nakamamatay na armas sa loob ng presinto kung saan ka boboto at sa loob ng radius na 100 metro mula sa presinto sa araw ng eleksyon. Huwag magbenta, mag-alok, bumili, maghain, o kumuha ng alak at iba pang nakakalasing ng inumin 1 araw bago ang eleksyon at sa mismong araw ng eleksyon. Ang mga hotels at establisimento lamang na pinapayagan ng Department of Tourism na magsilbi ng alak sa mga dayuhang turista ang maaaring di masaklawan ng liquor ban. Huwag magdaos o makilahok sa sabong, boxing, karera ng kabayo, hay-alay at iba pang kahalintulad na laro sa araw ng eleksyon. Bawat boto ay mahalaga at ang isang boto ay maaaring magresulta sa 6 na taon na maayos na pamamalakad ng gobyerno at matatag na ekonomiya o 6 na taon na talamak ang korupsyon, mataas ang porsyento ng mga walang trabaho at mas laganap na kahirapan. Protektahan mo ang iyong kinabukasan sa pamamagitan ng hindi pagbenta ng iyong boto. Tandaan, huwag matakot bumoto at bumoto ng tama. Good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Kumusta na po kayo? I hope everybody is doing good despite these difficulties, despite our difficult situation, di ba? Ang dami nang nangyari sa buhay natin, sa ating bansa, sa ating kapaligiran, ano? At andito tayo ngayon, makipagkwentuhan at magbibigay meaning sa ating kwentuhan din, ano. Nagpapasalamat kami dahil ito po yung first offering namin for the Scholastic Press Outreach Program this year at binago namin yung tema ngayon. Last year was based on a research by PUP Professor Hema Dimora. Ngayon, ang base or basis ng ating tema or theme for the Scholastic Press Outreach Program is a research by Professor Felipe Salbosa II and Assistant Professor Christian Esguerra from the University of Santo Tomas. Mamaya po, ibabahagi ni Sir Ipe. He will actually set the tone of the Scholastic Press Outreach Program this year. Bakit natin naisip ito? Bakit kailangan natin pag-usapan ito? Alright. Kanina sinabi ko ang dami nangyari at ang dami nangyari sa media last year or at the start of the pandemic. Ang more pronounced problems were being brought to the fore pre-pandemic at ngayon sa pandemic na to, mas naramdaman natin. Siyempre, pagkawala ng ABS-CBN, pagkawala naman ng mga newsrooms, shrinking newsrooms and talking in particular newspapers outside Metro Manila or even in Metro Manila, na lumiit yung newsroom, nagbawas ng mga tao, limited circulation, mataas yung cost ng paper, etc., and logistical requirements to be able to put out a journalistic piece or a paper for that matter. So last year, nabawasan din yung members ng PPI. So I think 13 in our list. Tapos they bounce back last quarter of last year. Pero itong bouncing back kasi depende sa nagdedepende sa survival nila. They're just getting by. Marami ng problema sila pre-pandemic. As I said, mas napaigting pa during the pandemic. And it's so unfortunate that a lot of our colleagues have lost their employment. And hopefully they get back the opportunities they deserve this year or post-pandemic. And the reason why we're doing this Scholastic Press Outreach Program for educators and teachers kasi kayo ang alay namin at kayo ang magiging the next generation, especially yung estudyante who are going to take a path or career in journalism or media, kayo ang magmamana, good or bad, kayo ang magiging next generation of media practitioners. So, narapat lamang na malaman natin ngayon sa ating difficult situation, paano bang pinagdadaanan ng ating media? At dahil nga din palapit ng election, ano ba yung hirap na pagdadaanan pa ng ating mga media practitioners covering elections on the ground? So, ang PPI ay nagkaroon ng madaming programa pre-pandemic and during pandemic, mas dumami pa. Kasi sabi nga nila, mas madali daw gumawa ng mga activities. And we're all seeing this ourselves in small boxes. Pero sabi nga natin, wala namang madaling gawin. At siguro lahat ng ginagawa ng PPI at lahat ng mga media organization for that matter ay pinag-iisipan talaga. So, we thank our partner, especially Seidel Foundation, for agreeing to renew the partnership again because nasa third year kami ng partnership and we're so happy that in addition, we also be doing a lot of activities apart from a regular activities or programming that we conducted last year and the other year. So maraming salamat sa Foundation, kaway-kaway kay Carol, kay Mike, kay Attorney Guts later, I will call him. At today, ito po yung Scholastic Press Outreach Program for the NCR leg, in particular with the Journalism Studies Association of the Philippines. Maraming salamat sa JSAP for agreeing to partner or collaborate with us for the first offering of PPI for the Scholastic. Kaway-kaway ang palakpakan sa JSAP. At nagpapasalamat din kami sa lahat sa inyo in the NCR na dumalo ngayon sa aming programa. At meron ding hindi naman sa NCR pero okay na din andito kayo. And those who are watching us live via Facebook. Thanks for watching and thanks for joining. And I hope you have an insightful discussion. Hindi natin patatagalin pa. Please welcome the resident representative of Seidel Foundation to the Philippines, Attorney Guts Heineke. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon, Ariel. Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your precious time on a Friday afternoon. Seidel Foundation is supporting this activity through and with the PPI because we think it's highly necessary and it's needed for the Philippines. So the Seidel Foundation is a German NGO. We are here in the Philippines for more than 40 years, and it's our goal to build up democracy and good governance. And we're doing this with Filipino partners for Filipino people. And having said that, the Philippine Press Institute is one of our most important partners at the time, because being a journalist in the Philippines is, on the one hand, is admirable. The working conditions are so hard, and nevertheless, you're doing it and you're looking forward to it. And journalism is necessary in order to inform the whole population of the Philippines, and that's a reason why it is so important to invest into free journalism, and that's what we are going to do here with this series this afternoon and later on all over this year. Having said that, thank you very much to all of you for joining. You will see at the end of this conference, there will be a short, a very easy survey. Please participate in the survey and please feel free to give us your comments, because this is also for us our first activity to this series for the year. And we depend as well on your comments, what can we do better and what was already good, of course. Having said that, once again, thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much for joining on a Friday afternoon. Now have fun and enjoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Attorney Guts. Happy Friday. Also please visit the page or website of Seidel Foundation and also PPI for more announcements on our activities, not just this Scholastic Press Outreach Program, at marami po kaming gagawin this year. Nakalimutan ko pa magpakilala. I always forget this. My name is Ariel Sisabilin. I'm the Executive Director of and Trustee at the Philippine Press Institute. I'm also joined here by our Seminar Director, who I'm going to introduce later, but please welcome the Chair of JSAP, Journalism Studies Association of the Philippines. Mag-JSAP na kayo. Kung di pa kayo ka-JSAP, mag-JSAP na kayo. My good friend, Professor Lucia Tangi, good afternoon to you. Lou, how are you?
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Okay pa ba kayo?
Okay na okay.
Okay pa rin, oo. Okay, so each one of us in this webinar has his or her own COVID story. In almost 2 years na tayo, no? We have witnessed how friends, relatives, and colleagues grieve for the loss of a loved one. We have seen how the pandemic has tested our patience, physical and mental strength, and of course, our faith. For this generation, this is probably the biggest story in our life that we will keep on retelling to the next generation. Now, when we were younger, actually, our lolo, our grandparents used to talk to us, tell us stories about the Japanese occupation, the atrocities. Siguro when we will grow older, ganun din tayo, no? But we will be telling our grandchildren about the COVID pandemic. So for present generation of journalists, the pandemic is also probably the biggest story that they will cover in their lifetime. We have also seen unprecedented infodemic and misinformation on the virus, the vaccines, and the policies related to the pandemic. This afternoon, the Journalism Studies Association of the Philippines, Incorporated, is proud to partner with the Philippine Press Institute for this webinar titled Midya at Pandemya. Our two speakers are both veteran journalists and educators, and of course, among the founding board of trustees of JSAP. I am confident that you will learn from their experience and research on how to improve media coverage in the time of pandemic. Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat, Lou. Very good 2 points there you raised about story of our lives. Ano? It was the biggest story so far na kino-cover ng media ngayon. At siguro marami pang iba in the future. But I think at this point, kung meron man tayong natutunan, siguro equipped na tayo with some instruments and tools to be able to face more challenging problems next time. Di ba, Lou? Ano? I'll talk to you a bit. Sa academic community, paano yung pag head-on, paano ang challenges naman in terms of the kind of education, how to ensure that the kids in school are learning, no, despite the difficulty.
Well, actually, for the journalism program, ang pinaka-challenging would be how to do their internship. Diba? Kasi dati we would send our pag internship time, it's the time for our students to go to conferences, yung mga ganon, go to the field to experience real journalism. Pero ngayon, ayan, biglang puro online na lang lahat yung coverage, no? And I think later one of our speakers will discuss about Zoom coverage, yes, no? And maraming nawawala eh. Of course, it's not a perfect setting, pero ang daming nawawala kasi sa Zoom coverage, no? Nawawala yung interaction with the source and also the direct interaction with your colleagues, no? And I think that is very important, and you can never learn that inside the classroom.
True. Very well, true. Thanks, Lou, for joining us today, and hope you enjoy the program. And I'll see you until the end of the program. Shout out to Biliran Province State University. So outside of NCR, Lou, meron tayong mga participants from other universities and colleges. Maraming salamat po for joining us today. And hopefully we can conduct one in your area, no, to be hosted by Biliran State. We'll talk some more later on. You can actually DM me an email as well. Thanks, sir, for joining us today. At this point, wag natin patagalin pa dahil exciting last year natin na theme natin, equally exciting then interesting din ating tema ngayon. Please welcome our seminar director, also news editor of Manila Standard, my very good friend Joyce Pañares. Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ariel. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to all of our participants. Very exciting, as Ariel mentioned earlier. We tweaked our Scholastic program for this year, and we are proud to partner with JSAP this time around. At tayo po ay actually ang magiging basis nito, and eventually we will see it in the succeeding months, is the research of Professor Ipe Salvosa and Christian Esguerra from the University of Santo Tomas. So, and we also shortened it a bit, our Scholastic, learning from our experience last year na sometimes inaabot tayo ng 5 hours. There was even one time na 6 hours tayo Scholastic program, ano? So we wanted short, concise, and sweet, but still as relevant and substantial as the Scholastics that we have that we did last year, ano? So without further ado, I'll start with Professor Felipe Salvosa II, the Vice President of JSAP and the program head of the journalism program of the University of Santo Tomas. He will be presenting his part on reporting in the time of new normal journalism amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello, Ipe. Good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon, Joyce, and good afternoon, Ariel.
Good afternoon.
Also, I'd like to greet Guts and Carol and Ma'am Lou, from JSAP. So can I go ahead with the presentation?
Yes, you want me to share your slides?
Yeah, so I would like to request for sharing privileges.
Here will be the one to give that. We'd like to greet first siguro our students who are with us today. kanina si Ariel mentioned, I think, biliran ba yun, Ariel?
Yeah, oo.
Madami tayong estudyanteng kasama sa room ngayon.
And
Okay, Ipe, I think
teachers, oo.
and teachers, of course, from the academe. Ipe, I think your slide is ready now.
Looking forward to interacting with you later, no?
Yeah, there will be a Q&A after the presentations.
Okay. So, okay, let me maximize my slides, no? So, I would just like to emphasize that this study is very preliminary, no? So that means I shouldn't take too long in discussing my initial results, no? And the title of the presentation for today is Reporting in the Time of the New Normal, the Journalism amid the COVID-19 Pandemic, no? And I am doing this as part of a global network called the Global Risk Journalism Hub, which is why I would also like to mention the regional coordinator for South and Southeast Asia of our Global Risk Journalism Hub, Dr. Sarah Chinasamy of Malaysia, who so graciously allowed me to present, apart from the Philippine data, also the regional data to provide more context, no, to our initial results. So as I said, our study is part of the Global Risk Journalism Hub. You might want to visit our website. It is a network of more than 60 researchers, no, from 80 regions, educators and practitioners from around the world. And the objective is to investigate the news reporting of globalized crisis issues, no? And another aim is to inspire collaborative projects transcending national boundaries, opening up new spaces for dialogue and debate regarding how best to improve the quality of journalism in the public interest within today's dimensions of globalized digital data ecosystems. The director of our international network is Dr. Ingrid Volkmer. She is with the International Digital Policy Lab in Australia. So, as I mentioned, myself and Assistant Professor Christian Esguerra are two members of the network from the Southeast Asia group, which is led by Dr. Sarah Chinasamy, who is a Malaysian social media and political analyst. Other members of the group are from India, Ankuran Datta and Uma Shankar Pandi, Manju Mishra from Nepal, and our two colleagues from Thailand, DK and Tom Tong. Okay, so let me proceed with my initial results now. So the study of the Global Risk Journalism Hub is actually composed of two tracks. No? So the first track is the snapshot survey conducted in the first quarter of 2021. No? And this tells us about the reporting conditions of journalists from all over the world. No? And this first track, no, the snapshot survey, is supposed to inform the qualitative interviews that we will conduct for the second track of the study, and which we will talk about later after presenting the initial findings of the snapshot survey. Okay, so what did we do in the snapshot survey last year? No? So we wanted to look at the challenges faced by journalists in covering the pandemic. We also wanted to look at the role of this information amid the pandemic. We also wanted to know the journalists' sources of information about COVID-19 and the pressures faced by journalists in covering the pandemic. Okay, so here's the breakdown of our respondents. No, globally we had 744 respondents. Now, what I'm presenting today is the result for the Southeast Asia region, which had a total of 175 respondents, which represents 24% of our global respondents. Now, so you can see here from the pie chart the breakdown of respondents. The most number of respondents came from India and the Philippines, no, followed by Malaysia, Nepal, and Malaysia and Thailand. Okay. As for gender, our sample has more male than female journalists. No? We also looked at their primary area. No, we found that most of people in our sample, no, recruited by the members of the network. Most of them are in national news coverage, while few others are in either local or regional news coverage. There are also a few who were considered international journalists or reporting to newsrooms outside of the country. Okay. As for the platforms of the journalists in the region, South and Southeast Asia, 41% reported working for internet, online, and digital portals, platforms rather. So they can either be web portals, aggregators, blogs, websites, and social media operations. Followed, of course, by the legacy media. We have print media, 25%, TV is 21%, radio is 6%, and the others 7%. Now, more than half are reporters, or your journalists doing field work, rather than doing desk work. So 52%. And then about a quarter are editors, and a small proportion would be from management. Now, 9 out of 10 journalists in our sample are writing about COVID-19, either always or very often. Okay. We asked journalists from Southeast Asia whether they felt that the reporting assignments were challenging overall during their coverage of COVID-19. And the result is that 8 out of 10 reporters feel that it's very challenging. It is challenging. 37% strongly agreed with that statement, while 42% agreed with that statement. So it's a very challenging coverage. Now, nearly 7 out of 10 feel they felt exposed to COVID-19. The statement with which we asked them to whether to agree or disagree was, I feel personally exposed to COVID-19 in the course of my work. And there was strong agreement from 28% of our respondents, and then agreement from 39% of respondents. So that combined, that's 7 out of 10. And then 76%, almost a similar portion, reported having at least one colleague who had COVID. So that's I'm guessing this probably has changed given the spread of new variants over the ensuing year. Now, last year when we asked the journalists in our sample on their coverage situation, only 37% said they were provided protective gear by their news organization. So the question was, my organization provides important health protection equipment, and 19% strongly agreed with the statement and 28% agreed. And then the others did not have agreement in the statement. So that means this probably explains why they really feel exposed to COVID in the course of their coverage. Now, going to this information, we asked them about their knowledge of what this information is. And nearly 9 out of 10 were confident that they understood what this information is. Okay. And then 6 out of 10 said that their organization has guidelines versus disinformation. Okay. And then more than half of the staff, based on their own perception, have received training in terms of handling this information. We asked the relationship between this information and the pandemic. And we see that disaggregating the data across the countries in the region, we are seeing here that this information, in terms of its effect on the pandemic, is more pronounced in 2 countries, the Philippines and Thailand, where agreement to that statement is in the region of 80% and above. Okay, although Malaysia was also approaching that kind of level. Globally, it's 72%. And given their knowledge of this information, internal newsroom policies on disinformation, training on disinformation, only 17% say that their organization has been associated with disinformation. What we observed, during the pandemic is the heavy dependence of journalists on the government for information. No? And the Philippines stands out in this regard. 91% of the Filipino respondents said they depended on the government for information on the pandemic. Followed by India, 87%, Malaysia, 82%. The global response was 75%. Okay. And now we ask the question of whether some journalists experience restrictions. The question was, I have not been restricted from covering the pandemic. And these are the responses. So Philippines, 34%, which tells us that they have experienced restrictions. The level of restrictions, while this is below 15%, below majority, the proportion is the highest in the Philippines, at 34%, based on the sample that we collected from of respondents from Southeast Asia, followed by India, and then followed by Malaysia and then Nepal. Thailand, Malaysia, and then Nepal. Okay. Now, trust in experts was very high. Okay, for health experts, there was agreement with the statement, that they depended on health experts from 9 out of 10 in our sample. Trust in the WHO was also very high. 7 out of 10 from our sample, although not as high as the trust given to health experts. We did not distinguish between government or private sector health experts. But this is the finding. Trust in experts is very high, but on the WHO itself, the trust is high, but not as high as the health experts in their own country. There was a high dependence on press releases. 77% of our journalists, in our sample, said that they trust the content of press releases. Okay. And then what followed was the scientific journals and social media. So we can see that this is an issue of access. So the press releases are readily available to our journalists, and therefore they use it for their work. The scientific journals, probably there are access issues, and which leads to a lower proportion of dependence. Social media has of the lowest proportion among the three, perhaps because of the presence of fake news and propaganda on social media. So this has implications on the way stories are produced. COVID-19 stories are produced. Heavily dependent on government, heavily dependent on experts. At the same time, journalists take the easy route by depending on press releases. The journalists that we interviewed also get their news from international media. Okay, 72% gave that response. We're combining all the agreement and strong agreement. Okay, so we can also see, well, based on the questions that we answered, we asked our journalists, we can also see that they're somehow compensating for this too much reliance on government and press releases, by interviewing marginalized sources. We can see that in Southeast Asia, at least half of journalists balance their coverage by interviewing marginalized sources. In the Philippines and India, this is very pronounced. 66% of our journalists covered, the journalists who answered our survey said that they interview marginalized sources. Followed by India at 60%, Thailand at 55%, and Malaysia at 50%. So we can see that the Philippines is a bit higher compared with the global rating. Okay. Well, well, perhaps given the dependence on the government, and the government knows this, no, that they are the central source of information for COVID-19, we can see that our respondents, no, when we asked, no, whether there was no government pressure to publish information, ano, the Filipino journalists said, yeah, there was no government pressure, no, 84%, no, and so this is true in two other countries, no. At least majority of journalists are saying this, no. India, Philippines, Thailand. There is no overt, no, government pressure to publish information, no? But that's not the case in other countries, no. For instance, Malaysia, we can see there a significant proportion of journalists saying that there's government pressure to publish information. Okay, and also Nepal. Okay. We also found that 6 out of 10 journalists fear that their organization will experience financial difficulties because of the pandemic. No, so this is the same with the global with the global response, 63%. If you break it down by country, we can see that the sense of financial insecurity is strongest in the Philippines at 81%. So 8 out of 10 of the journalists in our sample felt that the pandemic, no, will bring about financial difficulties, no, to their newsrooms, no, 81%, followed by Thailand at 64%, India 63%, Nepal at 61%. No, so this is especially more pronounced in the Philippines, and I think this is worth investigating in the next phase of our study. No. So, given the results of the last year's snapshot survey, these are the emerging themes in South and Southeast Asia drawn up by our regional group. No. So, first, the challenging COVID-19 response. So most journalists view COVID-19 news coverage as challenging as they feel exposed to the pandemic and know at least one colleague was infected. More than a third, no, do not have protective gear. No. Next, we can see an aversion to this information. There is a high understanding of what information is, and most journalists believe this information is affecting news coverage. No? Their news organizations are not likely associated with spreading disinformation. Next, government dependent. Now, there's a very high dependence on government information and press releases, and high trust in health experts and the WHO. Okay, balanced coverage. No, so there's an effort, no, by majority of the journalists in our survey, in our sample, and from the region, to try to balance news coverage by interviewing marginalized voices. We also found subtle pressure, no, not in all countries, no, but there's evidence of government pressure in some countries in the region. And finally, financial security. No, majority of journalists fear that their news organizations will experience financial difficulties, and this is most pronounced in the Philippines, no, among the countries included in our regional network. So, talking about the second track of our qualitative interviews, no, given the results of our snapshot survey, for the first quarter of 2022, 1 year after we rolled out our snapshot survey, we will conduct in-depth interviews with at least 30 journalists, no, who report on the COVID-19 pandemic from different platforms. No? So interviews may be done in person where it is allowed, by phone, or using Zoom or Google Meet. Selection of interviewees will be relativistic, meaning selection will take into consideration the different lived realities and experiences of journalists, reporters, editors, and emerging news professionals, and including new news actors. So this is an inclusive sample. It will also be purposive, meaning to say that the researchers will deliberately select news professionals and or influencers, new news portals, and crisis news actors to gain insight into their expert knowledge. Key organizations and players delivering news on COVID-19 will be identified. We will use the interview guide developed by the Global Risk Journalism Hub. So The interview guide was developed by the network and approved by a steering committee led by Dr. Volkmer. Okay, so how do we select the interviews, and perhaps PPI can help us, no, in
Yes. Very
our
well.
selection of interviewees,
Yes.
no. It will follow a two-step process as set forth by the Global Risk Journalism Hub. We will list key news outlets and media professionals in the crisis public ecology, meaning the key news organizations or players delivering COVID crisis news in the country. The researchers will then identify representatives of these news outlets. So Professor Esguerra and I will do the identification for the Philippines. We will draw up the list of key news outlets, no, that's stage one. And then we will have to ensure geographical representation. So selection of key news outlets in Metro Manila, Luzon, the Visayas, and Mindanao, as well as representation across platforms, print, online, TV, radio. And then we will also endeavor to ensure gender representation when we select the representatives of the news outlets. Okay, how are we going to analyze the data from our key informant interviews? So we will do thematic analysis, no, using Braun and Clark, who define thematic analysis as a method of identifying, analyzing, and reporting patterns within the data. The first step of the analysis is reading and rereading of transcripts. The data will then be categorized into groups while relevant points are noted. The next step is to come up with broader themes relevant to the research topic, and then we will review whether the themes are logical and distinct from each other. Okay? Then the fifth step is to identify the essence of what the themes are about. And then the final stage is the write-up of the narrative of the entire process. No? So I will end my presentation here, no, and I will turn you back to our seminar director. My colleague, who is also a member of the Global Risk Journalism Hub, the UST Journalism Faculty, and JSAP will follow and talk about Zoom journalism. Thank you, and I hope to interact with you later on.
Thank you, Professor Ipe. That was such an interesting presentation. Already there was a question sa chat box natin, although we'll ask it later, but just to give you a heads up, parang si Julie Alipalo was wondering why there was more trust on experts than on the WHO. Later on, you take that question mamaya kung nakita ba yon sa study natin. But very interesting study. We look forward then after the interviews. Mga anong buwan ba yan, Sir Ipe?
Oh, actually, we hope to conduct it later this month, no, and until March, prior to reporting to the Scholastic forum in April.
So we can expect around April or May. Madadagdagan na, no, yung details of the first part of our Scholastic. Thank you. So as Ipe said, our next resource speaker is also from the University of Santo Tomas. He is a news anchor of ABS-CBN News Channel. Mr. Christian Esguerra to discuss Zoom journalism in the time of pandemic. Good afternoon, Christian.
Hello, malinaw naman.
Alam ha, baka siya ay nalaglag.
Oo, baka merong...
Or may...
Ayan na, gumagalaw na si Christian.
Ayan na. Hello, Christian. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, sige, salamat. Sorry for that technical...
Sorry.
Audio.
Naka-on siya pero medyo mahina, Christian.
Ang ganda ng natin, Joyce, ng backdrop.
Oo nga, ng backdrop.
Yeah,
Dapat pala naglagay tayo nun. Ian, can you try it without the earphone? Minsan nagloloko with earphone eh.
Oo. Sige, try mo, Christian. Ayan, very good. Better.
The Zoom thing.
One disadvantage of Zoom journalism.
Ayan na yun yung topic mo.
Ayan na, yun yung intro ng topic.
Sige.
I'll
share it now. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. Sige. My topic for this afternoon is it sounds quite benign because the title is Zoom journalism. But I'd like to frame this discussion with this question. Sorry for the wrong grammar. It's supposed to be, do pandemic restrictions favor propagandists and disinformation peddlers? Palitan na natin. Yeah.
Edit na kaagad.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Do pandemic. Tsaka dito yan. Ayan. Okay. So basically, I'd like to frame this discussion with this question: do pandemic restrictions favor propagandists and disinformation peddlers? And a lot of the discussion will have to do with how we gather information and present them nowadays, at least for the past 2 years, because of the pandemic restrictions that we've all been experiencing. So this is a question which I think we can discuss more productively and perhaps with more color later on. So basically, ito alam lahat na ng mga journalists na nagko-cover ngayon ng iba't ibang mga issues during the pandemic. So basically, how has the pandemic affected our journalism? How we do journalism in the Philippines? Of course, just like other industries, our movements have been restricted quite heavily. There's heavy reliance on press releases, media handouts, and mouthpieces, as shown in the initial findings of the study presented earlier by Professor Felipe Salposa. Then, of course, remote coverage has become a norm. Because of this, ambush interviews have been limited, and there's heavy reliance with Zoom journalism. Although I'm using the term Zoom journalism, I think this discussion encompasses generally how we do distance interviews, meaning non-face-to-face interviews under a pandemic. So basically, Zoom has become the brand, the go-to term whenever people talk about how they're trying to be more resourceful to get information out of their sources. So this is basically the reality. Now the question is, do these pandemic restrictions actually favor propagandists and disinformation peddlers? My categorical answer to that is yes. But, yeah, really favors the propagandists and disinformation peddlers. But there are things that we can do as journalists. We don't have to surrender the white flag here. So in this case, we know that this is happening, especially in the context of the ongoing campaign. The campaign for the 2022 elections has not officially started, but we know that in reality, they've been campaigning for the past several months. Now, these politicians have been less dependent on the mainstream press, and this reduced dependence on the mainstream press is influenced also quite heavily because of the by the pandemic restrictions. If you're a politician or a propagandist, there is heavy use of social media content creation. So basically, they are the ones who are creating their own information and content on social media. And then because of that, they have better control of narratives. So this is how I'd like to illustrate it, the reality that we are facing now as journalists. I'd like to focus my examples on how the campaign has been going because of the pandemic, not necessarily on how we have been covering the pandemic itself. So these days, this is how the flow has been. The politician bypassing the press, which used to occupy this very important traditional space between the public and the politician or the campaigners. So they're able to bypass us, members of the press, and go straight to the public because of their social media accounts, because of their media operators and propagandists who craft the messaging strategy for them, and of course, because of their decision to tap celebrities and influencers. So, to many of them, basically, and we've been seeing this over the past few years, we are not as needed as far as politicians are concerned if they want to present or reach the public and come up with specific messages or narratives. The public, in turn, can also bypass us. Now, why is this very problematic? We're not saying that all politicians lie, but I would hazard to say that most of them do. Okay? And most of them do with self-serving intentions, if not bad intentions. So traditionally, as members of the press, we occupy this very important piece of real estate between the public and the politicians because we need to sift through whatever narratives or information that they're trying to push to get to the public, to the voters. Now, without us, the public is left, or the public, members of the public are left on their own. We're not saying that the public are without any wherewithal or resources or capabilities or faculties to identify the lies and the untruths coming from politicians. But in a democratic setting, we know that the press performs a very important role in this regard. For example, a press release that was sent by, let's say, Isko Moreno, Manny Pacquiao, Bongbong Marcos, Leni Robredo. Traditionally, any journalist worth his salt wouldn't just publish a press release straight out of the source or the politician. There has to be fact checking. Traditionally, we don't even have to use the term fact checking because that goes without saying that when you're a journalist, you check the facts before you present them. So there was a lot of scrutiny as far as releases, narratives, and other information coming from politicians are concerned. But now they can go straight to the public. And this is what's happening now. For instance, if you're Bongbong Marcos, technically, why join a debate when you will only expose yourself to a lot of questions from legitimate journalists? Why do that if you have 3.4, at least 3.4 million followers on Facebook? Why do that if you have more than 1 million subscribers on YouTube? Why do that if you can tap Tony Gonzaga, a celebrity who has a very large following in social media and whose videos, interviews, I'm keeping myself from using a particular adjective. I won't use it anymore. Okay, so why participate in a debate? Why expose yourself to an honest to goodness interview with a legitimate journalist if you can have people like Tony Gonzaga, who has a large following in social media? When I took a screenshot of this interview by Tony Gonzaga with Bongbong Marcos a couple of months back, there were at least 9.7 million views. Imagine that. So this particular interview was income generating for Tony Gonzaga.
Yeah.
Definitely. You cannot presume that this was not monetized because it would be stupid not to monetize this kind of interview with more than 9 million views. Imagine how much revenue this particular interview generated for her. Now, can you also honestly believe that celebrities like her would do an interview with a politician, with someone running for a position in the 2022 elections just for the sheer desire to present the side of that politician out of sheer goodwill? Of course, there's no way to find out because there's little transparency in this regard. But if you're a politician, you will tap a social media influencer in exchange for money. That is a given. That is a basic expectation. So imagine if, let's say, I were a YouTube star with, let's say, 10 million subscribers. I can easily earn more bucks by tying up with politicians. Let's say, interview Manny Pacquiao, Leni Robredo, Isko Moreno, Ting Lacson, Bongbong Marcos, and all those perhaps willing to spend just to be interviewed and just to get enough exposure through my YouTube channel and other social media platforms. So why bother to present yourself in a talk show? Why bother to sit down before a press conference, in a live press conference where you could be exposed? You could be asked about your ill-gotten wealth, how you benefited from that, about your being the executor of the estate of your father, why for so many years until now you've been fighting efforts by the government to recover your plundered wealth from the Filipinos, from the Philippines' public coffers. So if you're a politician or you are a strategist for a politician, this is the way to go technically. Okay. Now, what are the negative aspects of too much reliance on Zoom journalism or Zoom information gathering. For example, in terms of covering campaigns, you have here Isko Moreno, you have here Bongbong Marcos, Len Robredo, Calio de Guzman, Manny Pacquiao, Ting Lacson, and others running for president. There are more, not just the six people. Those of us who covered elections and campaigns know that it's very important to be right there, right in the scene, to observe the actuations of people, how people respond to the politician, how the candidates conduct themselves on the road, how they speak with people, the kind of lies that they mouth off, the things that happen behind the scenes. For example, trying to fix reporters just to provide them with a good press. These things can be known if you cover up close certain candidates. You know also the ethical and unethical practices by certain candidates and politicians and members of the press because you're right there. But on Zoom, how can you expect to do that? Of course, it's not to say that Zoom journalism doesn't have any use as far as journalism is concerned. Meron siyang gamit. For practical purposes, if you cannot be in a particular campaign, which is conducted, let's say, hundreds of kilometers outside of Metro Manila, you can rely on Zoom. But the problem is the framing of the narrative. For example, ikaw, you're running a newsroom, a television newsroom, a production, a newscast. Diba ginagawa natin, nagpapadala tayo ng mga crew, reporters, cameramen, tsaka yung tinatawag ng mga shooters to cover the candidates themselves. Because the expectation is that our frame of reference, our point of view, is that of journalism. We are dictated, we are guided by news values. But if we just rely on handouts, let's say, ako si Ping Lacson, ako si Bongbong Marcos, kung na kayo mag-cover dito, kami na bahala. Meron kami sariling crew eh. Meron kami sariling cameraman, meron kami sariling reporters, quote-unquote. So after ng interview, kay sir, kay ma'am, papadala lang namin sa inyo yung file. No need for actual physical presence. So the very fact that they were the ones who chose the shots for their candidates already allowed them to dictate the narrative. Yung mga kuhang paawa, yung mga kuhang padrama. Paano kung let's say yung kandidato pala may sakit? Siyempre walang aamin dahil tumatakbo sila, di ba? Pero makikita mo siya kung kino-cover mo siya up close and personal. Hapong-hapo, hindi makapaglakad na matagal. And these are information that people need to know as voters. Once validated, of course. But if you're a candidate who is able to dictate the narrative through your own lenses, most likely, it will be very difficult for the public to know about that. Kasi hindi siya nasisinaga ng araw. Hindi siya nakikita ng media. So that's just one basic example. Remember, for example, in a previous election that I covered, may mga kandidato. This is a very flimsy example. But just to show you how can things be very, very different for candidates. Yung mga kandidato na ang presentation nila sa campaign nila very clean, squeaky clean. Walang bisyo, walang ibang pinagkakabalahan, kundi quote-unquote tumulong sa tao. Kasi para sila yung kaloob sa atin ng mahal na Panginoon para iligtas tayo sa ating pagkakasadlak sa kahirapan. Okay? Ayaw nila makita na naninigarilyo sila, malakas sila uminom, etc. etc. So, normally, tatawagin yung mga reporters, huwag mo munang bubuksan yung camera, huwag mo akong pipicture ng ganito, naninigarilyo ako. Huwag mo akong, pag nakuna ng camera, nagmumura siya, o may pinapagalitan na staff, o may binatukan na botante, or isang tao on the campaign trail, hindi niya pwedeng ilabas siya, di ba? So, these things can easily be controlled by the candidate and their propagandists. So, ibig sabihin, the problem here is that our viewers, our audiences, the voters, become more heavily reliant on perceptions of their candidates, which can be very, very problematic as far as decision-making is concerned. How well are they able to know these candidates if their main sources of information would be the information released by the candidates themselves? Most of them without the scrutiny of the mainstream media, of the traditional press, or media organizations that are operating heavily online. That's one problem. Number two, pwedeng sabihin ng kandidato, hindi naman kami dumidiretso sa publiko eh. Yes, we have our own content, but the public is free to scrutinize our record or track records. Pero between the politician and the public, there's also this crucial middle point occupied by, hindi na nga natin siya tinatawag na influencers. Some people call them micro-influencers. Yung mga siguro pa-celebrity on social media, in particular YouTube, tsaka Twitter, tsaka Facebook, yung meron silang very solid following, which may not be as many as that of a regular celebrity. Kunwari, followers of, composed of 10,000 followers, 5,000, 3,000, or even 1,500. Konti siya in the bigger scheme of things. But this can be regarded as solid followers. So kung ano yung sabihin ng micro-influencer na yan, pwede makinig sila. This is similar to, let's say, Viber groups, which are also infested by a lot of propaganda. Yung mga tita, tito, yung may mga credibility within their own Viber groups or mga chat groups, pwede sila yung targetin ng kandidato, sabihin, ikalat mo naman to, papugiin mo naman si kandidato. And then because of their quote-unquote credibility within that very small chat group, that can also spread around. Traditionally, sa Jari ang tawag dyan, pass on leadership. Dito pwedeng pass on disinformation emanating from chat groups. So this is how the pandemic has affected us in a very negative way. But it doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it. Okay? Because for one, the pandemic restrictions are no excuse for us to renege on our basic responsibilities as a journalist. So example, you have to push the envelope, especially during interviews. If we are limited to conducting interviews via Zoom, we have to push the envelope. If we know that the candidate or the resource person is mouthing off bullshit during the Zoom interview, we can call that person out. But still with the modicum of respect. Okay? Ang problema kasi pag yung fake news paulit-ulit na sinasabi at pinapalampas natin, nakakatakot, di ba? Mahirap na siyang habulin. Okay? You should also try to meet persons or interviewees in person whenever possible, because you also understand the fact that we are not immune to this disease. Pare-pareho naman tayong tao, di ba? So buti nga ngayon, medyo mataas na yung vaccination rate, at least in Metro Manila, Central Luzon, tsaka Calabar Zone. But even then, we cannot let our guard down because the pandemic is still raging. But whenever possible, we try to meet our sources in person. So sa siguro mga journalism students, sa mga bata na nakikinig, tsaka nanonood sa atin ngayon, it's very important for you to meet sources in person, even for background information. Especially for on-record interviews. Iba kasi yung interview na face-to-face at natititigin mo sa mata yung kausap mo. For example, in my case, during my nightly political talk program, because of the pandemic restrictions, most of the discussions have been limited to Zoom interviews. Pwede mo pa rin i-call out yung mga BS sa mga politiko during that interview. Pero iba pag magkaharap kayo eh. Nakikita mo yung eye contact if the person is not willing to make an eye contact. Nakikita mo if a question could actually make a person uncomfortable. Nakikita mo kung sino yung mga kausap mo na medyo naluluha. These are the things that I've found out when I joined the television as a platform. Nakikita ko yung mga politiko na matatapang sa mga press conferences because they hold the microphone and they control the conversation. But in a legitimate interview, live on TV, makikita mo kung sino yung kinakabahan. Makikita mo yung sino medyo naluluha bago sumagot ng tanong. Nakikita mo yung daming tanong, ang daming iniinom na tubig, pabalik-balik, kinakausap yung staff niya. If I can share this with you, there was one time I interviewed a police officer. This was the first time I experienced this. A police officer who didn't know what to say on national TV. Ginawa niya, kinausap niya yung staff niya, merong index cards, nilalabas isa-isa. Meron siyang idiot board na ganyang kaliit. Talagang it was being flashed before him during the discussion. So that was one of the worst interviewers I experienced. Ayun. And lastly, I think I got this from a very recent study by professors from UP. They studied Twitter as a platform for political discourse in the 2022 elections. And one of the implications and recommendations that they mentioned was for media to be more discerning in reporting Twitter trends. Kasi nga pag masyadong online ang predisposition natin, para bang nahahawa rin tayo sa kababawan ng online platform. It's admitted. There are a lot of good things happening online. There are a lot of good exchanges, but there are also a lot of bad exchanges. And the platform itself, just like television, can also fan the flame of celebrity culture. Yung bang it can promote a celebrity culture among people, which can also lead to a lot of frivolousness. Diba, nakikita natin ito sa mga media reporters, for instance, diba? One term that I hate to use, basically is the term media celebrity. But you see a lot of our colleagues are actually doing that, diba? They present themselves as media personality. Una-una, you have to check kung may personality ka. Sigurado ako nasa media ka. Pero, I mean, that would be very presumptuous for many of us. Diba? Pero nakikita natin yan. Why am I saying this? Because this is one of the downside that I'm seeing because of this celebrity culture on Twitter. Now, another downside is, I think, the one mentioned in the study by Bunkin and Professor Fatima Dao. Sige, ano to? Assistant Professor Benedict Bunkin. So we have to be more discerning in reporting Twitter trends. Kasi ngayon, uso-uso, yung pag-trending sa Twitter, i-report ng mainstream media. Trending ngayon sa Twitter, ang bangayan, ang patot sa dahan, sa pagitan nila, sining cosplayer, that woman, yung ako nga pala yung sinayang mo, and then sumagot naman yung yung ex. Ayun, di ba? Strictly speaking, napakababaw nun, di ba? Pinapayaman natin sila dahil dumadami pa yung hits and clicks tsaka yung mga online revenues nila at our expense. Naghiwalay na, kumita pa silang dalawa, di ba? But more than that, how about trending topics concerning politicians? How sure are we that these trends were not manipulated by the candidates and their own strategists? Yet, we report them. Ibig sabihin, without us knowing it, we're also helping them without exactly helping our public. So these are some of the things that I just decided to mention in this brief presentation, and I'm looking forward to your questions later on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And we will have a 15-minute Q&A before we move on to our second part of the discussion. Christian, tanong ko lang kasi parang ang solution dito nasa newsroom pa rin di ba? Hindi mo pwedeng hindi mo pwedeng iasa sa politiko That's part of what they do. They try to manipulate and they try to dictate the angle of the story. So dapat ang solution nito nasa news desk, nasa reporter, nasa editors. Napansin ko kasi yan parang naging pardon the word naging tamad din yung mga ibang reporters because we are also operating in a Zoom environment. The example that comes to my mind immediately is when there was this DOJ undersecretary, and then he was saying that we should use Bayanihan 1 to punish violators ng social distancing. And then everybody just accepted it. No one even questioned him. No one even asked him, how can we use Bayanihan 1 when it's already expired? So parang ano yung solutions na nakikita mo how to get back what used to be yung gatekeeping, yung pag-edit, yung pag-filter ng balita at hindi balita ng news desks?
No, we have to get off our ass, diba? Kasi masyadong it's very easy to be lazy. I remember nung mga batang police reporters tayo, diba? nandun din yung tendency na iba na maging tamad. For example, may sumabog, o may sumiklab na sunog, o may ginahasa. Huwag natin puntahan. Hanapin na lang natin sa blotter yan later on. Tapos diba sa ibang mga beats, merong kultura ng
Eponente.
di ba? Isa susulat, itutupi yung bond paper, papalitan
nila.
If a fax machine. Katamaran, it's been here for so long, di ba? Perhaps as old as prostitution itself, in laziness among journalists, which makes it more challenging for us now. Kasi ngayon, sayang yung drive lalo ng mga bata reporters because they know the technology. They know the platform itself. For example, ito, when I joined ABS-CBN, isa sa mga pinanghihinayangan kong experience, nakikita ko ibang mga reporters online, nasa newsroom, and they're covering press conferences. Mga sinasabi ni Harry Roque, ni Salvador Panelo, mga briefings ng DOH. You're not basically having to ask questions. Nakikinig lang sila. O kaya yung mga interviews sa TV, ini-storify nila. Yan ang nangyayari ngayon, di ba? At mas lumawak yung ganyang scenario because all of us, even the field reporters, have been reduced to Zoom interviews. So, paano gagawin? Pag nasa Zoom interview, usually yung mga politiko sasabihin, yung questions, pakisubmit in advance.
Yeah.
Ang ginagawa ko kasi pag sinabit mo yung actual questions in advance, baka makatanggap ka ng actual non-response in return. O kaya hindi ka papasukin
They might
sa Zoom.
not call you, yeah.
They might not even call you. So, ang suggestion ko very concretely, mention a general question. Sabi ni iba, sir, isn't that a lie? Why is that? Because you're still going to ask about that.
Mamaya mo na lang naisip yung totoong tanong.
Ginagawa ko rin yan nung di ba, nung panahon ni Gloria, nung nagko-cover tayo, tsaka kay Pinoy After, di ba? I hated it whenever
They ask questions.
Would ask questions in advance. So ginagawa ko, I would send general questions. Sasabihin ko, I'm going to ask about BFA. Pag tinanong nang hingi, what about? Malalaman mo na lang pag tinanong na. Yung mga ganong simple techniques na pwede natin gamitin.
Yeah. But interesting, what you mentioned. And I think it's not just journalists who are suffering from this, but more so our teachers who are also conducting their classes online. Ang hirap mag-interpret ng non-verbal cues ngayon. Kasi paano, tititigan mo ba sa Zoom? Ano ba to? Hindi na ba komportable yung in-interview ko? Nagsisinungaling ba siya? It's hard enough face-to-face Diba, lalo kung sanay na sanay magsinungaling yung kausap mo. All the more when you have that layer of that filter na may naka-zoom kayo pareho.
Joyce, may
Si
isang
Julie,
example.
go ahead.
Okay, nababasa ko. Although ganda yung tanong ni Julie.
Oo, nakita ko yung kay Julie.
Oo. Example ng how to read yung mga facial expressions. I remember before, siguro 2 years ago ba ito, last year, I was interviewing si Deputy Speaker Eric Martinez of Valenzuela. He was one of those who voted against ABS-CBN's franchise.
Yeah.
This is one of very ridiculous example or experience I had. So nung napunta yung discussion namin, kasi ang gusto niya, kaya siya pumayag sa interview, yun yung time na parang inaaway siya nila Alan Peter Cayetano. Kasi nagkakaroon power struggle between Lord Alan Velasco and Alan Peter Cayetano.
So, the speakership, yes.
Nung yun na yung problema, so tinanggal siya initially, di ba? So, ang bilis niya magpag-guess. Okay, sige. Because he thought na yun lang ang pag-uusapan. Yan ang sinasabi ko pag hindi mo kontrolado yung narrative. Paano kung bayad ka niya? Sabi niya, hindi, ito lang pwede mo itanong sa akin. Yeah. So, I took that as an opportunity to also hold him accountable for his vote a few months ago against ABS-CBN. Kasi we had to ask these people why they voted that way. And they never answered or they were never given the opportunity to respond. So, ang tanong ko sa kanya, proud ka ba sa vote nyo? Panindigan nyo ba yan? Ito ba yung boto nyo kung sakali hindi kinakaalyado kay ganyan? Nung medyo naiipit na siya, bigla lang nagkaroon ng audio problem. Makikita niya sa YouTube, mahahanap niya. So, sorry, I cannot hear. Ganyan. Tapos nung nagtanong na ako ng iba, nung nagpaalam na ako, unfortunately, sinabi ko, technical problem, ganyan. Biglang luminaw. And di ba yung mga technical people natin, makikita kung may problema yung Zoom niya. Dito makikita ko may problema si Joyce o ako, di ba? Nakikita mo Doon wala siyang problema. So that's one problem with Zoom-based interviews, di ba? Pwede kang layasan ng kausap mo. And
pwede sila mag-freeze. Wala nag-i-interview kayo. Suddenly freezing.
Oo.
No, but I recall just for the sake of our students who are with us today, isa sa mga pinaka mahirap for me i-interpret ng mga na-interview natin, and I'm sure you'd also agree. Secretary Ermita, who is the executive secretary of Gloria Arroyo, oh my God, that man, you cannot read his face. It's very difficult. Hindi mo siya makitang galit, hindi mo siya makitang nakangiti. You would only know that he's already uncomfortable because malikot na yung kamay niya. He keeps on touching other things sa podium, even if his face you cannot read. Pero yun nga sa Zoom, that one is, wala na yan sa atin. Nawala yan sa journalist, yung pag-interpret ng non-verbal cues ngayon. Si Julie, may mga comments siya sa chat, yung perspective daw ng mga journalists, nagbabago, especially if matagal nang naka-work from home. Yeah, maybe yung iba nga mas nagiging hindi na ganun ka-passionate about pursuing a story. Naging sanay na tumatanggap na lang ng press release. And I actually like that word to describe what's happening right now. We just storify instead of pursuing the story, meaning whatever material is given to us and we just develop it into a story instead of actually interviewing people, actually getting our own data. Lalong-lalo na, I'm sure your study would bear me out. Lalong-lalo na dito sa pandemic, yung reliance natin sa official data, we cannot even challenge the DOH data. Kasi tayo mismo dependent tayo sa kanila eh. Was that also seen in your study?
Very limited kasi yung findings namin because we were unable to probe deeper into their answers. That's why I was gonna tell Julie kanina dun sa question niya, what could be the reason why the proportion of trust on health experts was higher than the WHO's. That was an interesting result that we got, and we really hope to get a deeper perspective in our key informant interviews. But there were findings by the Pew Research Center last year. No, although ang sample nila would be adults globally, no, in their sample of countries. More than 60% of people in these countries approved of the WHO's handling of the pandemic, but the result was not uniform everywhere. And we can see the two outliers, Japan and Korea, who were kind of skeptical as to the role of a big member of the WHO, China, on the decision making in the WHO. So I'm sure yung issue na yon played a role into that, and because our journalists are, of course, we assume that they are more knowledgeable on the issue, being one step ahead of the rest when it comes to the news. So and that is what we would like to find out from our key informant interviews. Now, addressing your concern and Christian's concern earlier, ako naman, I'm kind of worried, of course, this is not true of all journalists, especially the younger set of journalists. I'm really admire their work, their passion, their creativity, their new ways of expressing things. But I'm really afraid and even scared for some of the new journalists now who might think that sitting in a Zoom press conference is journalism. No, we were taught by the veterans in our newsroom na it's everyone's story. That should not be your story. You should do enterprise work, no? And yun ang fear ko na because of the pandemic restrictions, there's little space. No, of course we should add limited resources of newsrooms, limited resources, limited space for enterprise stories. No?
And the very real threat also to our health.
Which should be,
of course, you don't discount that, diba?
Of course, definitely. But it should be the norm. Yung hindi yung covering a press conference it's not the entirety of the work of journalists.
Correct.
You have to look for stories on your own. No.
Beyond. No. Joyce, baka sa second track that you mentioned, yung tanong tugon dun sa tanong ni Joyce, baka pwede English sa second track ng research,
Oo.
Christian.
Yeah. Ay ninyo.
Alam ba siya rin sa qualitative part?
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Respond yung mga kakausapin.
Perfect. Okay, thanks.
One more question from our participants. I think this is for Ipe. Does the pressure on journalists include pressure to temper reports critical of the respective government's response to the pandemic? And what is the extent kaya?
Sorry, I didn't
Yung
quite get
pressure
that.
daw on journalists, does that include pressure to temper reports critical of the government's, of your respective government's response to the pandemic?
We didn't see that no, from the data, pero from our conversations with the members of the network, in some countries merong ganon, no? So we could see that in places like Malaysia, no,
Oh yeah,
but not so much in the Philippines, not so much in India, no, where the journalists have relatively more freedom, no. But I'd like to investigate that further, no. So if there were if you didn't feel you were restricted enough, no, I'm sure lalabas yan sa ibang tanong. No, I think we should switch our line of questioning and find out which of your activities have been restricted because of the pandemic. For sure, yung pila ng tanong sa press conferences during the Zoom press conferences, no? I've been talking to one reporter saying na lagi siyang hindi napipili sa tanong.
Hindi natatanong.
No? Does it have something to do with your news organization or the way you've been asking questions? No, so because of the limitations of technology, that's also another form of restriction on news coverage.
Pero ito parang more of cultural, the way we look at our role in society. Like for example, in Malaysia, parang sa constitution nila nakalagay specifically for nation building ang media. So parang do they get that feeling na kung palpak yung response ng gobyerno ko, should I report about it? Baka I'm not helping in nation building, etc., etc. Baka may lalabas na ganun eventually dun sa...
I would agree. Yung media culture of the country also plays a role. Iba sa atin, iba sa kanila.
Of
Christian,
course.
saying?
Yung binabanggit mo, I just recall this problem na how hard our questions have been or not have been. For example, when it comes to leadership during the pandemic. Kasi technically, di ba, dapat may sarili kang bait as a journalist. Pero makikita mo yung propaganda ng government, they were pinning the blame solely on the DOH. Rightly so. Kasi DOH yung head ng IATF eh. And when in the pandemic, dapat DOH yung hold accountable dyan. Pero, paano yung leadership at the very top? Parang very minimal yung questions during Zoom interviews, di ba? Kunwari, di ba tayo nagtatanong ng mas consistently regarding the problem with Duterte himself? Na kahit maayos yung pagpapatakbo ng ibang LGUs, ang problema yung guidance from the top. Kasi saan ka nakakita ng isang bansa na antindi ng problema sa pandemya, pero yung weekly decision whether to put on stricter lockdowns or to relax the lockdowns, kailangan na mag-announce presidente. At kahit may decision yung ITF, although that is recommendatory, parang kailangan lahat nag-iintay kay President Duterte, takot. Yung issue na yan, di ba dapat tinatanong yan ng media? Is this arrangement messing up our pandemic response? A big part of it is leadership. And number 2, risk communication. Kunwari, ikaw DOH, pinapaliwanag mo tamang pagsuot ng mask. Eh, yung presidente mo hindi nagsusuot ng mask o maling pagsuot ng mask. I mean, yung mga inconsistencies coming from the national government, I don't think we have been asking enough hard questions. Don't get me wrong, ang dami nagtatanong ng mga hard questions, pero parang kulang na kulang sa dami ng mga kalokohan na lumalabas doon sa pandemic handling.
Even the oras of the talk to the people.
Yeah.
Parang nung una may resistance, tapos biglang tanggapin na lang natin. Talagang every Monday mapupuyat tayo. Diba? Tapos pag hindi siya nag-air ng Monday, parang pasalamat pa tayo sobra na, at least today, I get to sleep earlier. Sobrang eyebags na inabot natin dyan sa talk to the people kada Monday. And, we just sort of accepted it.
Oh.
Pero yeah, yung asking the difficult questions, hindi ko naman masabing nabawasan, pero baka nawalan ng opportunities din siguro. Or kailangan lang i-remind ang ating mga kasamahan na, that's part of our job.
Tsaka iba siguro, takot mabara ni Harry Roque. At si Harry Roque.
Oh yeah, you have a climate na ganyan eh.
Pag nagalit si Sari Roque, tatawagan yung newsroom mo, tatawagan yung boss mo, papatanggal ka sa beat mo. Di ba? We know this thing.
I think we have to remove that yung ganong fear. It's part of the job. No, yung mabara ka or matabla ka ng spokes, no? Kasama sa trabaho yun.
Hindi lang ng spokesperson, even the very top. Remember yung ginara niya sa Davao, the journalist na pinagsabihan niya.
Maganda yung comment ni Julie. She says that there are heavy restrictions if Duterte is visiting a city province. So, covering the defense and PNP beats may restrictions. Yeah, I agree. No?
In fact, for any president, that always happens. Pupunta sa isang lugar and then you really feel na dati nga for the longest time, ang issue is whether ilan ang pwedeng itanong ng local media, ilan ang pwedeng itanong ng national media na dala ng presidente, etc. May ganung pang kiskisan among us, diba? Among colleagues.
Hindi, ang kulang
context ng questions dun sa respondents would be in terms of their COVID coverage. But for sure, there will be restrictions elsewhere, especially field work.
At saka kulang dyan yung we know the restrictions in covering a president. Hindi mo naman talaga pwedeng lapitan yan basta-basta. Pero dahil may pandemic restrictions, hindi ka makapagkape, hindi ka makapagchismisan doon sa mga tao na malapit sa presidente who could provide you with better context. Kasi hindi mo kukuha yung context sa Zoom. Kunwari, kausapin mo yung source mo. Sir, mag-Zoom nga tayo kasi gusto kong humingi ng background information sa'yo. Because the setting itself is formal. Makikita mo yan pag bumisita ka sa office niya, nakapagkwentuhan ka, nalagay yung loob niya sa'yo. I mean, these things we're missing out.
Kasi doon na kumukuha ng story mga journalists, no?
Yeah.
Sa coffee shop talk, dinners, lunches, no? And they are,
lalong election coverage. Most of the stories do not happen during the sorties.
Yeah.
They happen after the official events, di ba? Doon mo makikita sa loob pala ng slate, may away si Senator 1 and Senator 2.
Yung mga speeches sa entablado, hindi yun ang story.
Yeah. May na-recall lang ako na, sorry. Not for public consumption, but I recall one eksena ng isang candid campaign, the one who's running for senator, then yung reportedly ay paramour ng kanyang dad. Oh. And then they were on the same stage and they didn't beso each other. So parang lahat ng journalists were waiting for, will they greet each other or not? Parang wala na yan ngayon, hindi na siguro ganun yung klase ng although mababaw na example. That's one thing that you'd miss now because
mga behind the scenes, di ba?
Oo.
Yung mga hindi obvious.
Aming sinasabi ni Julie. Si Julie gusto ko na isama sa sample ng key informant interview.
Isama yan.
Isama mo siya.
Actually, kasama talaga
12 hours of waiting, 500 meters distance, RT-PCR, yes.
RT-PCR.
Apply for permission from Maro. Yeah. Hindi ka pwedeng humarap sa presidente nang wala kang negative RT-PCR. Kaya, most of the reporters would rather not cover na lang. No? So they will rely on transcripts. No? Question
actually,
is,
that's also difficult. I had one coverage where they required an antigen before you enter the venue. Nakakakaba din. On a personal level, nakakakaba. Paano kung bigla kang mag-positive doon? Diba, unang-una nakakahiya. Sabihin nila, si Joyce positive, kaya hindi nakapag-cover. Tapos parang, diba, may ganun din eh. So yung mga additional
transcripts, you rely on handouts, pero yun ang tinuturo sa atin ng mga veterans eh. Don't rely on transcripts, don't rely on handouts, ask your own questions. Those things we cannot do because of the pandemic, because of the prevalence of Zoom journalism.
Dapat pala may part 2 ito, no? What can we do? So since we're discussing the problems, next time baka you'd want to consider to add it. What can we do given the fact that this is now our scenario? This is now our environment. How do we operate in this scenario? Of course, it's easy to say, be more matapang, be more etc. But can we come up with concrete solutions on how to use this environment to our advantage? Something to think about for our next Scholastic.
Yes.
So ayun, kung meron pang tanong, ito pa pala, the danger na baka ma-spot ka ni Duterte at mag-decide to make beso-beso. Yes, Julie, hindi pa man din siya nag-wear ng mask ng tama. Afraid. So ayun, if there are no more questions, thank you so much, Professor Ipe. Thank you, Christian, for setting the tone of our Scholastic today. And we will move. Wala tayong coffee break dito, no? Hindi uso sa PPI ang nagko-coffee break. Dediretso po tayo sa second part ng ating discussion. And this one naman, kung medyo na, paano ba? Nakita natin yung downside, yung hindi gaano magandang naidulot ng ating pagiging everyone online. Itong part naman na to, this presentation of Ms. Rowena Paraan will show us naman kung paano natin nagagamit din yung online platform to do journalism and specifically to do citizen journalism. So I'd like to call Rowena Caranza Paraan, the head of ABS-CBN's Bayan Mo Ipatrol Mo for citizen journalism in the time of coronavirus. Hi, Tuwing!
Hi, Joyce. Teka, nahihirapan ako paano ako dudugtong. Pero
Kaya mo yan, Weng. Kaya mo yan.
Oo. Nainggit ako sa mga background nila.
Oo nga. Next
bakit
time, Weng,
wala
magaling
ka?
din tayo.
Bakit kami lang?
Oh, late ko na nakuha yung link eh. Naka-mermaid background pa ako.
Okay, sige. So, siguro ganito na lang. Yung citizen journalism is something that we can do whether there is pandemic or not. No? Kaya lang dahil sa panahon ng pandemic, parang nagkaroon siya ng dagdag na role, no? Mas malaking role sa mga newsrooms. And whether we like it or not, yung citizen journalism din, nandito na rin siya to stay. Bukod dun sa nagkaroon ng pandemic, which makes it difficult for journalists to go out, yung citizen journalism, nauuso na rin siya sa hindi lang sa Pilipinas, kundi sa buong mundo. So, let me share my screen. Okay, kita nyo na?
Yes.
Sige. So, kung dati ang dinidiscuss ko, ano yung role ng citizen journalism para sa 2022 elections, medyo shift tayo ng konti. So, citizen journalism in the time of coronavirus. And what I'm going to talk about, apat lang naman na points. Una, ano yung potential ng crowdsourcing? Kasi yung citizen journalism is a form of crowdsourcing. Pangalawa, ano ba yung citizen journalism in a very simple definition? And then yung citizen journalism in the Philippines, what news organizations are doing this? And then paano nakakatulong yung citizen journalism, whether tungkol sa issue ng pandemya o sa panahon ng pandemya or in general, no, paano siya pwedeng makatulong. So let us see first what happened dun sa Boston Marathon bombing. So alam natin lahat, siguro na yung Boston Marathon, this is a huge event para sa mga runners, para sa sports world. Pinupuntahan siya ng maraming tao, no, na ginagawa siya taon-taon. Noong 2013, nagkaroon ng bombing sa panahon ng Boston Marathon. And the very first information that was published about it, interestingly, did not come from news organizations. It came from an ordinary citizen who tweeted about it. No? Sabi niya, was 2 blocks away from Boston Marathon finish line when boom, boom, gray smoke, lots of police. The tweet came out at 2:57. 2:57. The next one came at 3:08. No. So sabi ni Taylor Dobbs, at least 5 ambulances have gone to Boston Marathon finish line from where I stand. And that came out at 3:08. So 2:57, 3:08. And finally, a news organization came out with the story or broke the story at 3:20. So 2:57 yung una, Netizen, and then the Atlantic Wire at 3:20. So merong difference ng 23 minutes. Sa online media, napakalaking difference no. Kapag ang GMA7 na una ng 23 minutes mag-break kesa sa ABS-CBN, normally maraming kantsawan yan. So napakalaking bagay yung 23 minutes. And finally, CNN broke the story at 3:40 or 43 minutes after the first tweet about it. So itong ganito, it shows us yung potential, no, ng kung ang information ay nanggagaling sa mga ordinaryong tao, sa ordinary citizens. So itong incident na to, pinakita niya kung ano yung pwedeng maging malaking papel ng citizen journalism sa gathering and dissemination of news. Sa Pilipinas, kung natatandaan niyo itong insidente na to, ito yung Huli Dap, na kung saan merong isang sasakyan along EDSA, just a few meters away from the headquarters of the Philippine National Police, merong isang sasakyan na biglang hinarangan ng isa pang sasakyan. Doon sa pangalawang sasakyan, may mga bumaba na may mahahabang armas, may mga M16 silang dala, tinutukan nila yung unang sasakyan. It turned out that the first vehicle was carrying loads of cash, 200,000 plus. And then it also turned out that the men from the second vehicle, the ones carrying M16 rifles, were actually active police officers. Yung picture na to ay kuha ng isang netizen. Nakita niya yung nangyayari, kinuhanan niya ng picture, in-upload niya sa Twitter. And dahil lumabas siya sa Twitter, nakita siya ng media at ginawan siya ng report. And later on, nung inimbestigahan, police nga pala yung nangharang. And ito yung tinatawag na kunwari hinuhuli pero hinuhold up. So yung term na huli up. So again, pinapakita niya yung paano ang isang concerned citizen taking a photo of an incident using his social media account, disseminating the information for the public to know. So both the Boston Marathon bombing and this incident of Hulita, pareho yung sinasabi niya, na yung citizen can play a big role, no, in informing the public about what's happening. Whether it's about a bombing or an incident like this sa EDSA or tungkol sa baha, mga bumabagsak na poste ng kuryente, baho-bahong kalsada, o kaya ay even corruption, no? Incidents of corruption sa local government. So ito ay lahat nagpapakita na yung citizen journalism merong pwedeng maging papel, no? Sa pagbabalita. May mga related terms sa citizen journalism. Anuhin na lang natin. So yung una is crowdsourcing. Because citizen journalism, as I said, is a form of crowdsourcing. Hindi lang sa media, hindi lang media yung gumagamit ng crowdsourcing. In fact, yung mga negosyo, madalas itong gumamit. So when Starbucks, for example, nagtanong siya sa kanilang mga customer, no, ng ano yung design na sa tingin nyo maganda sa susunod na mug ng Starbucks, that's a form of crowdsourcing. When I think it was DHL, nagtanong siya, no, nag-crowdsource siya sa mga tao at tinanong niya ng paano pa pwedeng ma-improve yung service ng kumpanya at marami yung nagbigay ng suggestions and until now, no, nagbibigay sila ng may mga nakukuha pa rin sila. So this is a form of crowdsourcing. So yung media, yung crowdsourcing as a term, I think first came out in 2005 sa isang article, no, ng Wired. Sinasabi niya kung paano yung ilang processes, no, or ilang tinatrabaho sa media ay parang pwede mo nang i-crowdsource at mas marami kang pagpipilian at mas less yung cost. So crowdsourcing became parang naging staple o naging regular o mas lalong nauso sa loob ng media. And yung mga contents na binibigay ng citizen journalist became known as user-generated contents. And then, ang karaniwan, because citizen journalism is usually about local issues, dito na lumabas naman yung concept ng hyperlocal journalism. Meaning, yung mga tutok ng balita ay karaniwan very, very, very local, tungkol dun sa community, tungkol dun sa nangyayari sa kanilang paligid. Hindi katulad when, for example, we ask reporters to fly to Mindanao or to join the boat going to the West Philippine Sea. So, iba yon, no? Pag citizen journalist, ang karaniwan, ang kinukuhanan nila, ang balitang nire-report nila ay tungkol dun sa kung ano yung nakita nila on the way to school or on the way to the office, o yung ano yung napapansin nila kapag nag-iikot sila dun sa community nila. So, yeah. At dahil sobrang nauso ang citizen journalism, merong mga ganitong outfits na lumabas, no? One is Storyful. Nag-verify sila at nagbebenta ng content na based sa mga nilabas ng citizen journalists. One of their heads came to the Philippines a few years ago, and we even asked them to discuss with us, with Bayan May Patrol mo, kung paano tumatakbo yung Storyful. Kasi kumikita sila from citizen journalism. And then there's Bellingcat, which is known for mga even investigative reports na crowdsourced. So ito yung ilang halimbawa ng mga outfits o organizations that hindi lang siya sinasama yung citizen journalism, pero yung primary content niya ay citizen journalism outputs. Sa Pilipinas, marami ring gumagawa ng citizen journalism. So, syempre, you have Bayan May Patrol mo, which I handle in ABS-CBN. Then, GMA7 has Scoop. Ang Rappler ay merong Move PH. At then, meron din yung Radyo 5, meron sila yung Taxi Squad. No? Ito yung mga taxi drivers na, at sila talagang by membership. Meron silang ID. At I think nagkakaroon sila ng General Assembly. So ito yung mga ilang halimbawa ng citizen journalism sa Pilipinas. Pero meron pa ding even yung mas loose na practice of citizen journalism. Ito yung mga tao na tinatag ang media kapag may nakikita sila na interesting o sa tingin nila dapat bigyan ng atensyon. So itatag nila yung BMPM, tatag nila yung GMA7, tatag nila yung Rappler, tatag nila yung mga kung ano yung news organization na gusto nila na tumugon. Or it can be a specific program like KMJS o yung sa Tulfo o TV Patrol o kung ano yung nakikita nila na parang nagki-carry o nagdadala nung issue na gusto nilang maibalita. Yan. So, paano nakakatulong yung citizen journalism? Si Jimmy Domingo, meron siya sinasabi, before Taxi Quad, meron ng DCRH. Totoo yan, no? In fact, wala lang akong makitang logo at saka yung picture. Pero yung DCRH, meron sila yung mga jeepney drivers, mga drivers na sila mismo yung nagre-report on air. Pinikwento nila kung merong aksidente, kung sobrang traffic. At tuwan-tuwa yung mga drivers. At meron silang sticker na nilalagay sa jeep nila na proud silang ng DZRH. Okay, so how does citizen journalism help? So just to illustrate, I will show you some actual reports. Ayan, ito yung all-time favorite namin. So whether this is pandemic or election-related, lagi ko itong ginagamit. This was sent to ABS-CBN by 2 high school students in Ubay, Bicol. Ito yung pinakita nila tungkol sa eskwelahan nila, no, na walang dingding, walang sahig, walang CR. Ayan. So ganyan yung tsura ng eskwelahan nila. And after attending a citizen journalism workshop, pag uwi nila, kinuhanan nila ng video, and then lumikap siya ng TV Patrol, lumabas siya sa national media, and after it came out, nagkaroon ng solution, no, yung problema. And ito na yung video na sumunod na pinadala nila. Yan. So, ito na yung eskwelahan nila. Ayos na. Meron ng sahig, meron ng dingding, naayos na yung bintana, at may CR na sila. So, ito yung isang pwedeng gawin, no, ng citizen journalism. I-highlight yung isang problema sa isang community, lalo na yung malalayo na usually hindi nako-cover ng media. At nabibigyan ng attention and solution yung problema na nire-raise. Another example is this Maglolo. Ito naman sa Catanduanes, sa Bicol, no? Isang teacher yung nakakita nitong scenario na to, no? And of course, it would be a teacher who would appreciate this more. Lolo na pinapayungan yung kanyang apo habang nag-aaral. At ayon sa lolo, naglalakad sila ng mahigit 30 minutes to get to this place. Dito lang kasi may signal. At yung barangay nila walang kuryente. So nagbabayad silang 15 pesos para mag-charge ng cellphone. Nung lumabas yung storya, merong nag-donate, no, na OFW para magkaroon sila ng solar-powered charging station. Tapos marami ring nagbigay ng tulong kay lolo at sa kanyang apo. So again, another example of how citizen journalism can help. These two, this one on the left is an image of the Ampatuan massacre, no, that happened in 2009. The very first image of the massacre that came out and was seen by the public ay isang photo na pinadala ng isang citizen journalist. So ito yung unang-unang nakita ng mga tao na larawan ng Ampatuan massacre. And then this one was sent by a citizen journalist also from Marawi when the Marawi siege erupted. It happened afternoon, no, yung unang putok. Mahirap magpadala agad-agad ng news team dun sa lugar, no? It will take several hours. So, yung mga pinadala ng mga netizens para ipakita kung ano yung nangyayari sa kanilang lugar, naging malaking tulong para dun sa unang-unang balita na nilabas namin tungkol dun sa Marawi siege. And this was image. Mga tao na naglalakad, no, nag-evacuate, dala-dala yung mga gamit nila, hila-hila ang mga bag, kasama yung mga anak, yung mga bata. Marami pa yan. Ito lang yung isa dun sa mga images na yan. So, citizen journalism can help get us those very difficult images that you need for your report, for the public to see exactly what's happening. Madaling sabihin na pumutok yung bakbakan sa Marawi, pero ano itsura, ano yung impact no dun sa community? Anong nangyayari doon? So yung mga ganitong video, ang laking tulong niyan para natin kung anong nangyayari. Ito naman, panahon ng kalamidad. These are images from Newscoop. Ito ay earthquake, ito ay baha. Tapos bukod doon, meron ding mga katulad niya na pampagood vibes, no? May hugot line. Nakakapagod umakyat ng bundok pero mas nakakapagod ang umasa sa wala. Marami pa to. Ituloy isa dun sa series ng nadala ng isang citizen journalist sa USP. So, paano nakakatulong ang citizen journalism? Sa una, it highlights community issues. It serves as a bridge between those in need and those who can provide assistance. It calls attention to emergencies. It can provide updates from the ground on important issues such as during calamities and during elections. It can provide a venue for sharing positive experiences, mga good vibes, and it can link people and build communities. Sa panahon ng pandemic, itong lahat ng to napakahalaga, no? Itong lahat ng kayang gawin ng citizen journalists, nakakatulong siya ng malaki. Sa panahon na ang mga journalists ay nahihirapan pumunta sa iba-ibang lugar para mag-cover at kunin directly from the communities, no, kung ano yung nangyayari. So yung papel ng citizen journalist becomes even more important or naha-highlight yung kaya nilang gawin sa panahon ng katulad ngayon na merong pandemic or katulad nung panahon ng may bakbakan sa panahon ng Marawi Siege, for example. Or kapag sa napakalayong lugar tulad ng Ubay Bohol at nung iba pa, no, na nagagawa ng stories because of contributions coming from citizen journalists. So ano yung role ng citizen journalists in this time of coronavirus? Gusto ko lang ipakita yung mga stories that we were able to gather because of citizen journalists. So ito halimbawa, pumasok to sa inbox, no, ng Barangay Patrol mo at kinikwento niya yung violation ng protocol, ng health protocol doon sa isang lugar. At kinikwento niya na meron pang kagawad na kasama dun sa nag-violate ng protocol. And then you have ito, pamimigay ng ayuda, galing naman to dun sa taxi squad. Tapos ito naman ay kung paano pinalakpakan, no, na parang rumarampa yung isang lumabas from the hospital. Early days ng lockdown in 2020. So napakalaking bagay na yung makagraduate ka at lumabas ka na ng hospital. Tapos ito yung mga sacrifices na ginagawa ng ating mga frontliners. Ito yung isang team ng diagnostic team sa La Union at saka ito naman yung kwento ng isang nurse mula na nagsiserve sa isang COVID ward at kung paano yung sacrifices niya. And then you also have this mga paalala, no, na lumalabas kung paano maging mas safe. And then merong mga call-outs na ginagawa para magkwento ang mga tao tungkol sa kanilang mga experiences. Tulad nitong call-out na to, paano kayo nagpapalipas ng oras ngayong ECQ. And then you also have these good vibes na mga video katulad nito. So these are nurses, no? Most of them are nurses, mga health workers sa St. Luke's BGC na magagaling sumayaw at nagti-TikTok at pinadala nila, no? So yung ganito, hindi lang siya nakakatuwang panoorin, kundi nagpapaangat ng spirit, no, sa panahon na people are so depressed. There was no vaccine yet and we didn't know when this situation would end. No? So ang laking tulong ng mga and at the same time it's a way to pay tribute to our frontliners. So paano yung mga possible roles ng citizen journalism in the time of pandemic? Una, give information about the situation in the communities that journalists find hard to reach. No? Monitor compliance and implementation of health protocols, fight disinformation. Ito napaka-importante kasi ang daming kumakalat. So yung mga tao mismo, kung aware sila, kaya nilang sagutin kung ano yung, like halimbawa, yung kapag nagawa mong pigilin yung paghinga ng 10 segundo, hindi ka tatablo ng COVID. So yung mga ganong klase. Or kapag nagpabaksin ka, mag-glow in the dark ka. So people, pwede silang maging katulong sa paglaban sa disinformation. And then sharing of relevant information with friends, helping each other to cope by providing inspiring stories of resilience and providing people a voice, which is what citizen journalism is all about. Or at least the way Bayan May Patrol Mo, for us, this is what citizen journalism is all about. It's really giving voice to the voiceless. At sa panahon ng pandemic, and as you discussed in the first part of this forum, napakahirap gawin yung mga dapat natin sanang nagagawa ordinarily, tayong journalist. Then mas malaki yung papel ng mga citizen journalists kasi kaya nila tayong tulungan. At tapos yung mga hindi natatanong, hindi nakakapag-voice out, ito yung platform na pwedeng ma-fill yung ganung gap. O dito yung platform na pwede nating bigyan ng pagkakataon yung ating mga kababayan na magkaroon ng boses. So, yun. Yan yung citizen journalism na pwedeng may malaking papel. I think news organizations just have to find a way, how to harness yung ganong pwedeng power ng citizen journalism. Siyempre may perils din yan. So yun naman din yung isang kailangan gawin para ma-minimize yung possible perils. Like these are, most of them are not trained in journalism. So providing them the resources, doing trainings like we do, pwede yan, kayang-kaya nilang gawin. Tapos ipaunawa, ano ba yung papel ng media? Hindi lang ito para magpasikat ng tao, hindi lang para makita mo yung pangalan mo na lumabas sa TV or sa online platforms. Kundi ang papel ng media is to give public the information that they need to know. So, yun, kung maipapaunawa yun, maibibigay yung mga resources, mabibigyan natin sila ng skills, napakalaking pwedeng itulong ng citizen journalism. And I think that's it.
Okay. Thank you, Ate Weng. Babalikan natin kayo mamaya after nung susunod na presentation. Actually, ako magpe-present. Just for this Scholastic and the next one in February. And then si Francis na po yung magtutuloy nito. For your questions kay Ms. Weng, please put them sa chat box natin para mamaya po during our Q&A, babalikan po natin lahat yan. May mga comments pa doon, pati si Mother Julie, doon sa parang citizen patrol doon sa area naman nila. Now we move to the last part of our discussion, which is fighting truth decay. And sana gising pa ang ating mga estudyante. Are you all awake and ready to play? This is actually a game. We will be playing. Teka lang, ha? Dapat siya ay slideshow. Slideshow ba yung nakikita? Care. Ang nakikita ba slideshow or yung PPT, yung PowerPoint? Ha?
Yes po. Yung
Slideshow?
Hindi ma'am, yung ano po.
Hindi. So kailangan ko siyang gawin.
I-reshare lang ma'am po.
Slideshow. Yan. Better?
Yes ma'am po.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So this is, kaya lang pag ganito, hindi ko makikita ang chat box. Ano ba yan? Teka lang ha. I will just move it na lang ng ganyan. Okay na to? So this way I can see the chat box. Okay. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them sa chat box habang ako ay nag-represent because I will be asking questions actually sa ating mga participants. Okay. There you go. So I call this a fighting truth decay, and this is a fact-checking workshop, a mini workshop for all of us. How do I move this? Wait, ha? Wait lang, hinahamon ako ng ating technology. How do I move to the next slide? Care. Paano mag-move sa next slide pag ganito?
Ang nakashow po yata, ma'am, is yung single slide lang po.
Okay, so what do I do? Sorry ha.
Mag-out lang po, ma'am, tapos i-share lang po yung ulit ng slides.
Close ko muna siya. Wait lang.
Yes, po.
Ayan, is this better? Lalakihan ko na lang. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Same screen pa din po nung kanina, ma'am.
Same pa rin, Joyce. Oo.
New share. This one.
Yes.
Oo, yeah.
Kahit hindi siya
Full.
slideshow, yeah. You can read naman. Okay, so first we'll play a game. Very quick game. No need to do research. No need to do anything. For our participants, just type in your answer sa chat box. So, a teenager was fined 100 pounds and was dubbed a litter lout for feeding chips to birds. Is this true or false? Totoong balita ba ito o fake news? Just key in your answer.
Yes.
Chat box.
We'll look at your answers now.
Tres, I will call you later after this sa Q&A. May comment to siya sa Citizen Journal. Please, for our students, put in your answers sa chat box natin. Is this true or false? Pinakain niya yung ibon ng chips, tapos pinagmulta siya ng 100 pounds. May sumagot ng true. Actually, isa pa lang. Let's try to make it fast yung pagsagot. Hindi ito kailangan pag-isipan. Gut feel yung kailangan dito. May sumagot ng false, true. Well, mas marami ang nagsabi ng true. Okay, so this is an actual, this really happened. At siya, yung naka-picture dyan, siya yung napagmulta. Because you can pay pigeons pero hindi ka pwedeng magkalat. Kumalat dun sa kalsada yung kanyang chips kaya siya ay napagmulta. Next one. A camel survives after losing half of its body. True or false? False, sabi ni Chesley. Yeah, karamihan false.
False
okay,
daw.
so it's really false. No camel can survive that kind of mutilation. At chinek siya actually ng Snopes. Pinatunayan nila na siya ay isang edited photo. I'm sure si Kuya Jimmy Domingo, who is with us today, will be able to identify kaagad na false yun based lang dun sa photo. Dahil alam nila yung markers kung ginalaw yung photo. Nakikita yung sagot, kaya naman pala. Kaya dapat wala talaga itong Wala dapat itong nasa gilid.
Oo, kasi merong X tsaka check.
Oo.
Itan mo. Pwede mo i-hide.
Opo, i-hide mo na lang, ma'am. Close.
Hide na lang, oo.
Pag clinose siya, lost lahat hindi ko na alam where's the other slide.
Tsaka meron na talaga siyang mark.
Oo nga. Ay,
The
mag-aano
mark-
na lang ako. Slideshow, sana makita ko pa rin ang sagot nila.
Sige, sige. Hindi, ako magsasabi, Joy.
Ikaw magsayan.
Oo.
Ayan. That's the
Sige.
best ano.
Sige,
Next
sige.
one. NASA is installing internet on the moon. True or false?
Sige.
Parang
hindi
ano lang to,
sagutin
no?
May
Ano yung sa
unang
kay Optimus Prime?
Oo, meron yung sumagot true agad. Isa pa lang so far. Si Jaika. Merong false. Okay. True, false. Ako, sige. Hintayin ko.
Yan. So, ang tamang sagot,
False. Oo.
mas maraming false.
Oo. Yes.
It's actually true.
Ala.
They're putting 4G network on the moon. Baka mas malakas pa yung signal sa buwan.
Ang nakakuha
Kesa
si
sa atin.
JR Bugarin.
O, di ba dito sa atin very intermittent. Last one. This is the last game.
Oo.
A police in Germany rescue a man being chased by a baby squirrel. Kung kayo ba, tatakbo kayo kung ganyan ka-cute yung hahabol sa inyo?
True.
Karamihan true.
True.
Yeah, it's actually true.
Oh,
And that's the actual squirrel
ang cute.
na napagod.
At tatabol.
O, pati yung squirrel ata they had to rescue dahil napagod din sa paghabol dun sa lalaki. So there, so now I can just do slideshow. Okay, so bakit ganun ang mga naging sagot ninyo? So our biases come into play kapag tayo ay nag-analyze ng information. Diba? There's what you call availability heuristic or availability bias. Kung ano yung natatandaan natin, kung ano yung available immediately na information, iisipin natin na baka yun ang totoo. Or kung ano yung laging inuulit-ulit na dinidikdik sa memorya natin, yun yung may isip natin kaagad na posibleng totoo dun sa situation na kaharap natin. So halimbawa, kung, ano bang magandang example? Mula pagkabata nyo ay sinabihan kayo ng parents ninyo, for the female students who are here, na kapag kayo ay may monthly period, kayo ay dapat uminom ng Coke para lumakas yung period nyo, you are most likely to believe that, whether it's true or not, kasi paulit-ulit siyang dinidikdik sa utak ninyo. There's also what we call confirmation bias. So kung meron na kayong built-in na paniniwala or what do you call this, or pagtingin sa isang bagay, if you hear it from someone else at kaparehas dun sa sarili ninyong pananaw, most likely you are also to believe yung nagsasalita na yon. This is strongest when dealing with emotionally charged issues. Siguro halimbawa, usapin ng BTS. Kung ikaw ay maka-BTS tapos makarinig ka ng someone na pro-BTS din, baka you're more likely to believe na yung balita na binibigay niya sa'yo or yung information na binibigay niya. Meron din tayong tinatawag na authority bias. So we tend to be influenced more by the opinion of an authority figure. Diba? Kaya nga, simula pagkabata, ang training sa atin, not to question the statements of our parents, not to question the statements of our teachers. So hanggang paglaki, ganun yung authority bias na dala-dala natin. When in fact, and in truth, there are times that even people in authority nagkakamali rin naman. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, ay nakapagbigay din sila ng fake or misinformation or disinformation. Ngayon, ano ba ang categories of information disorder? You have three categories of information disorder. You have misinformation, meaning mali yung information, shinare ninyo, pero walang intent na mag-cause ng harm. Halimbawa, nung pre-pandemic, pag umuulan, isa sa unang titingnan natin sa Facebook yung hashtag walang pasok, di ba? Tapos, nakakita ka ng hashtag walang pasok, pero 3 years ago pala. Pero sa sobrang excitement mo, you shared it kaagad sa Facebook kasi tuwang-tuwa ka. walang pasok, di ba? So mali yung shinare mo, pero wala namang intention sa'yo na manakit o mag-cause ng harm sa mga classmates mo. Nagkataon lang na hindi ka nag-isip bago mo, di ba, click before you think. I think before you click, hindi mo na proseso muna, tapos nag-click ka kaagad ng share. Disinformation. False information deliberately shared with intent to cause harm. Alam mo na mali, pero isi-share mo pa rin. Halimbawa, naalala niyo yung photo nung shinare nung mga anti-Leni Robredo na parang kinulayan nila, ginawa nilang kulay pink yung buong rally. Halatang-halata mong photoshop, pero they kept on sharing it na claiming na itong mga taga-Leni Robredo, pati lahat na lang from top to bottom na kulay pink. So deliberate to. Ang kaibahan niya sa misinformation, there is intent to cause harm. Malinformation, ito para sa akin ang pinakadelikado. Because what you're doing here is you're sharing a piece of correct information and deliberately shared but with intent to harm. So it's either because hindi mo binigay lahat ng information, konti lang, tapos hindi nakita yung bigger picture, or halimbawa, ang isang example nito actually is yung what they call the revenge porn. Diba? Yung kung meron kang private photos tapos they shared it online, it's correct, hindi siya false photos, pero it's not supposed to be shared online. And thus, it causes harm. So may Venn diagram tayo para makita lang natin kung saan nagko-cross yung points ng misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So there's falseness and then there's intent to harm. Okay, so the term fake news doesn't even begin to cover all of this. Most of the content is not even fake. Mas madalas na hindi genuine, pero taken out of context, sometimes weaponized by people who know that falsehoods are based on a kernel of truth and are more likely to believe and to be shared by people kung merong konting katotohanan dun sa pinapakita natin. So agents of disinformation have learned that using genuine content reframed in new and misleading ways is more likely to deceive people. So halimbawa ito, yung photo ng bata na nakakulong, pinost siya tapos nakalagay, this is what happens when the government believes people are illegal. Kids in cages. Tapos, ang totoo niyan, itong batang to, parte siya ng isang protest. It's a stage protest. Protesta siya. So, hindi siya kinulong ng gobyerno. It's part of a protest. Pero it was used with the false context. Totoo yung content, genuine yung content, pero na-reframe siya in a dangerous manner.
Right.
Imposter content. Nagpapanggap na media. Ito, isa to sa pinakadelikado. In fact, I would like to move a bit further. Delikado rin for me yung satirical media. Hindi ko alam if you've noticed it, pero halimbawa sa Facebook, imbis na Philippine Daily Inquirer, nakalagay Philippine Diary Inquirer. Tapos puro satirical yung post. Or yung Philippine Star, nakalagay Philippine Char. Diba? Nakakatawa siya sa simula. Pero if you think about it, kung hindi na-realize ng tao na impostor content yung tinitingnan niya, posible niyang mapaniwalaan na yun ay totoong media content. So, di ba ginagaya yung ating masthead, ginagaya yung logo, pati breaking news ng ng BBC, ginaya. Pero lahat ito are impostor content. Manipulated content. Ito naman, posibleng totoo yung parehas na photos pero pwedeng pinagsama, inalter, photoshop, manipulate. Kunwari, itong isa, yung police, they're arresting immigrants na nakapila para sa election. When in fact, magkahiwalay siyang photo. Pinatong lang siya para pagmukain na ito yung context nitong photo na to. Meron pa nga mga tinatawag na deep fakes I don't know if you've come across that, pero yung mga tipong video, halimbawa si Obama yung nagsasalita, boses niya, pero actually in-splice from different videos niya, tapos sinasabay dun sa pagbuka ng kanyang bibig. So that's manipulated content. Now, this is actually a game. If you have a computer, if you're in front of a computer right now, for our students, for our teachers who want to teach this eventually sa class nila, you can go to getbadnews.com. This will show to you kung paano ba mag-isip ang isang tao na magpapakalat ng disinformation. Bakit natin gustong malaman kung paano siya mag-isip? Because knowing your enemy is winning half of the battle. So kailangan alam natin, how does a disinformant think? So mabilis lang to ha. I will just scroll through this. So if you play the game, so yes, we are here for the position of fake news tycoon. We don't ask kasi kung nagtanong pa tayo, may moral objections pa tayo sa lagay na yon. Walang moral objections ang deliberately nagpapakalat ng false information. So frustrated, okay, sabi nga natin kapag emotions, mas madaling makatrigger ng emotional response din sa ibang tao.
True.
So mag-vent siya sa Twitter, this government is a complete and utter failure, etc. May hashtag pa, resign, losers. So are you angry enough or I'm not angry enough or we tweet this, of course. So tumaas ng konti. Kung napansin niyo sa taas yung ating credibility at nagkaroon tayo ng 8 followers mula sa 0 kanina. Pero sapat na ba yun? Siyempre hindi. Gusto natin marami pa tayong lokohin. So we'll raise our credibility and then what do I do next? You can impersonate someone important or you can fake an official Twitter account. Mas madaling mag-impersonate. Plus, may credibility na yung taong i-impersonate natin. So let's impersonate someone important and we impersonated Joe Biden. Para lang sa matalas ang mata, mapapansin nyo kaagad, mukhang totoo, di ba? 46th President of the United States of America. Pero yung mga letra niya, yung Biden, Enye. Yung president, yung E niya may omlot sa taas. Yung U niya, yung parang smiley na U. Pero mukhang totoo pa rin. As your president, I have issued an executive order, blah, blah, blah. Hashtag you got annexed. So pag tweet mo yan, so pinoint out din niya na iba yung pagkakaspell ng pangalan ni Biden. May mga naloko tayo. Tingnan nyo yung Twitter followers natin tumaas. Naging 39. So, from hashtag, ano yung hashtag natin kanina? Annex Canada. You got annexed. Yung sumagot sa atin na galit, ang ano naman niya, ang hashtag niya, leave Canada alone. So from that false information, biglang naging parang totoo kasi may mga nagre-react na ng mga tao. Meron din naman na nag-retweet ng ating hashtag, you got annexed kasi naloko rin. Akala nila si Biden talaga yung nagsasalita. How are you feeling? Do you have moral objections? Again, walang moral objections ang isang disinformant. So ano yung next step? You can only imitate people so much. Ang i-imitate naman niya ngayon is start a news site. So magpapanggap siya ngayon na isang media. Ang title niya, The Cosmos Post. So anong job title natin? Siyempre, gusto nating itaas yung credibility. Pag nakalagay dyan anonymous or dito sa Pilipinas, ano ba yung mga uso? Works at Krusty Krab. Di ba yan yung mga usual sa Facebook? Yeah. Hindi ka masyadong paniwalaan. Isipin nila, ano ba yan? Obvious na false information ang isi-share nito. Pero kung gamitin mo ang position na editor-in-chief, may dating. At tataas ang kredibilidad mo. So magpapanggap ka talaga ng media. So kailangan may slogan para kumpleto ang ating Cosmos Post. Pipili tayo, yan. Bursting the mainstream media bubble. Sipin nyo yun, makakapagsinungaling ka na, nasiraan mo pa yung totoong media. Kasi sinasabi mo na ikaw yung alternative to the mainstream media. So yan. So the Cosmos Post is now our basis for your fake news empire. And you earn a badge. Yeah, you want to play this game, you can take it further because this is the impersonation badge. Actually, this is being taught to kids as young as 6 years old in other countries. para lang naintindihan nila kung paano ba gumagana ang utak ng isang disinformant. And why? Because kids at a very young age are already exposed to gadgets. And sinasabi nga natin, yung media and information literacy, kailangan yan, the moment they are exposed to gadgets, we also have to inoculate, vaccinate them with the proper tools to fight disinformation. So yeah, I'd like to share lang a few points from the Global Disinformation Order. It's a 2019 study from Oxford. Sabi nila, organized social media manipulation have taken place in 70 countries. Pataas po yan. I'm very sure during the pandemic and as we speak, mas mataas na siguro yung bilang na yan. And social media has become co-opted by many authoritarian regimes. In fact, hindi lang social media, pati media. Pero mas madali kasing i-co-opt yung SOCMED. Huwag na tayong lumayo. Yung Myanmar, nung nag-declare sila ng military junta, ang una nilang binanatan ay patayin ang internet connection ng mga tao. And then they're able to control what goes out on social media. And despite there being more social networking platforms more than ever, Facebook pa rin ang platform of choice para sa social media manipulation. In the Philippines, this is especially true. Bakit? Merong Facebook free. Wala kang load, maka-access ka ng Facebook, pero hindi mo maklik yung link. Hindi mo mabasa yung article. So ang nababasa mo lang yung headline and the accompanying photo. Ngayon, kung clickbait yon, madali ka namang maloko, ay isipin mo kaagad, uy, siguro ito totoo, share ko nga. Kaya kumakalat ang disinformation sa Facebook. Ano ba ang consequences ng information disorder? So meron kang erosion of trust in journalism and journalists. Remember yung pinaka-nakakairitang term na ginamit nila sa atin? They called us prostitutes. Na para bang tayo pa yung may mali. Sila nga itong pakalat ng false information. It undermines the importance of press freedom and freedom of expression. There's loss of distinction between truth and lies. Na para bang pwede ka mag-insist na ito yung totoo kahit na siya ay mali kasi gusto mo lang, kasi feel mo lang na yun yung tama. And malicious targeting of critics, of course. So this is for the organized social media manipulation. Ngayon, disinformation is nothing new. If you are religious, if you are Catholic, it goes back way to the Garden of Eden when the snake told Adam and Eve, if you eat the apple, you gain, you gain knowledge, di ba? Yun yung sinabi ng snake. That is actually malinformation kasi hindi kompleto yung data niya. Sinabi lang niya, you gain information. Niya sinabi na sipain kayo sa Garden of Eden if you eat the apple. But now, fast forward to 2022, technology has hastened the spread of disinformation. And elections and crises such as the pandemic, which unfortunately both are present in the Philippines by May, as of now, as we speak, di ba, the campaign period, have been weaponized to clamp down on dissent. So ito example ito, actually kay Ate Weng ko ito nakuha. At this is Joseph Stalin, and yung kasama niya ay ang head ng secret police niya, si Nikolai Yezhov. Eventually, they had a falling out, nag-away sila, and this was in 1938, even before Photoshop was invented. Ang pinagawa ni Stalin, pinatanggal niya sa mga photos yung mukha ni Yezhov. As if Yezhov did not exist, kasi nga pinapatay din niya. Okay, so fact-checking 101. Ito na yung medyo tools that we can use to arm ourselves. So paano ba mag-fact-check? Always check your URL. Diba? Ano ba yung URL? Yung www.up.edu.ph. Halimbawa lang. So there are certain domain extensions that will trigger you, will alert you kung anong klaseng website ba yung tinitingnan mo. If it's .gov, you assume that it is a government agency. .edu, it's an academic institution. .org is most likely mas mas mataas ang credibility kaysa dun sa mga .com. You do vertical and lateral reading. What is vertical reading? Vertical reading is within the website, you check it pababa. Tama ba yung mga detalye? Tama ba yung mga storya? Baka naman sa bandang baba ng website nakalagay, this is a satirical website. That is vertical reading. Lateral reading is you open another website to check kung ano ba yung binabasa mo dun sa unang website. Halimbawa, ang nakita mo dun sa unang website ay sinabi ni Duterte na pwedeng panglinis ng face mask ang pagbabad nito sa gasolina. So you do lateral reading, you open other news sites, you go to gmanews.com, you go to abs-cbnnews.com, inquirer.net, philstar.com, etc. And check kung meron din ba silang reports nun para mapatunayan natin kung talaga bang sinabi ni Duterte yun or hindi. For the record, sinabi niya po yun. Sorry, who's that? I could not see, sorry. Dahil
Sabi ko lang sa inyo kung bakit nag-incomplete yan. At nasa sa inyo yan, hindi na kasi, ayoko na kasing mag-recommende kung anong gagawin niyo. Baka mapahiya lang ako dun sa i-recommend ako. Baka mapahiya lang ako dahil kung hindi niyo tatapusin yan, baka mapahiya lang.
Sorry, who is speaking, Ariel?
Example, si Justin, kung saan kayo pwedeng kumuha ng number of hours. Net 25, pwede. O tinanong mo ako, pwede po bang pagsabayin? Pwede. Hanggang
sorry, sino yung
tayo makakakuha.
May sumasabay. Okay na ba yon?
Okay na po, ma'am.
Okay na, okay. I will go back. Sorry ha. Akala ko kailangan ko makipag-shouting match bigla. Kailangan ko rin lakasan yung boses ko. Wait. You use search operators para malimitahan yung mga resulta ng pag-search ninyo. You do reverse image search. You check the metadata of your photos or you follow fact-checking websites. So, isa sa ginagamit natin to check your URL, students, please look at the website, the photo here. You can use lookup.icon.org. So, ito, kung alam mo yung website, hindi ka sigurado kung tama ba yung tinitingnan mong website address, ilagay mo dito sa lookup.icon.org at ipapakita niya sa'yo kung tama ba, totoong website ba, yung tinitingnan mo or is it an impostor website. So halimbawa, I wanted to check cnn.com. So I told lookup to check it for me and ito ang contact information na lalabas. May-ari ay Turner Broadcasting System, sa anong mailing address sa Georgia, etc. etc. And then I wanted to see cnn.com.net.ph. Ang daming ... Obviously, hindi yan totoong website, pero may mga maluloko pa rin yan. So i-check natin sa icon.lookup at, sorry. Wait lang ha. And yeah, sorry. It will tell you nasa baba. No registry server was identified for this domain, which means this is not a real website. Now, there are also, if you can see this photo, medyo malabo lang ano. So may timestamp siya, Los Angeles, may logo ng CNN, nakalagay pa live, nakalagay breaking news. Tapos ang ticker niya, hospitals on lockdown as first COVID vaccine patients start eating other patients. So from a vaccine story, naging isa siyang zombie story bigla. Gusto natin tong tingnan and we will do it via Google reverse search. Makikita natin na yan, based sa 2019 report ng The New York Times, this is actually a photo of a trauma base at Temple University. It was, yes, a shitty kind of operation, kaya kumalat yung dugo, but it has nothing to do with the vaccines and nothing to do with becoming a zombie if you get vaccinated against COVID-19. Now, how do we do the Google image search? Halimbawa, ayan, we will do this step by step. This is a photo daw of Italy in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. Mukha namang totoo, naka-PPE, may mga nakalinya na mga patay, Tapos may Red Cross pa yung truck, di ba, na logo. Pero titingnan natin siya sa Google Reverse Image Search. Ang kaibahan nito sa ordinary na Google, you go to Google, you ask Google to look for the photo. Sa Google Reverse Search, you have the photo, you ask Google, hanapin mo itong photo na to, saan ba talaga to galing. And you drop the image dyan sa Google Search. At lalabas na yun pala ay galing sa pelikulang Contagion, which was released in 2011. Yes, it is about an airborne infection, pero 2011, wala pa kahit sa panaginip natin ang COVID-19. So it's again a real photo, but reframed and manipulated. Now, how do we get naman the metadata of our photos? May tanong ako, saang lugar ito? This looks like probably an Asian country.
Yeah. China or Japan.
Japan, Korea, di
Si
ba?
parang may snow eh.
Yung mga nagwi-winter. Siyempre,
North
Pilipinas
Asia.
wala. Init at baha lang ang meron tayo.
Correct.
Not this snow. So, we want to see the metadata of this photo. We can use metadata2go.com. Then, you drag and drop your photo dito sa metadata. Sa mata natin, ang nakikita lang natin ay yung photo. Pero if we ask the metadata, ano mga makikita? Ito pala ay isang photo ng Agence France Presse. Ito ay kinuha ng January 20, 2022, 3:15 00 GMT. Ang object name niya ay China where there's snow. So alam mo na sa China ito nang galing. At meron siyang caption, a man walks past a tree decorated with lanterns at Jingshan Park on a snowy day in Beijing on January 20, 2022, taken by Jade Gao for AFP. So, ang daming data pala nung photo. Hindi lang natin alam kasi hindi naman natin tinitingnan ang metadata ng photo natin.
Correct.
Nakalagay doon kailan kinuha, saan kinuha, at kung nilagyan natin ng caption, pwede pala makikita rin natin kung kanino naka-copyright yung photo. Lastly, let's check, let's visit fact-checking sites, 'di ba? Hindi lang naman may mga nauna na sa atin in doing this. So you have Verifiles and you also have check.ph, which is also a partner of PPI. So ito mga to for Philippine websites, they do fact-checking. Yan, and this ends my presentation with a gentle reminder, we're all entitled to our own opinion, but not to our own facts. Stop share. Ayan.
Galing.
So sana ay nakatulong at naka-inoculate sa ating mga kasamang estudyante at mga teachers today. And I'd like to call back Weng because may mga questions at comments dito. Teka lang ha, let me go back to... If you have questions, please post sa chat box. I'd like to call Tres Reyes. Mamu, Tres, maybe you'd want to ask your question kasi nahirapan daw siya sa chat box.
Hi, Ma'am Tres.
Hi.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy Valentine's Day in advance.
And Chinese New Year. Yeah.
Chinese New Year pa. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. No, I just wanted to comment on Weng's presentation. With all due respect, no. I'm glad that you followed Weng's presentation with that of Joyce's, no? Because for all the reasons that Joyce pointed out, we cannot, the news desk, because I was senior editorial director of CNN Philippines for a long time.
Yeah.
And we get a lot of information, including from social media and citizen journalists. But we cannot compete with pabilisan, no? Because, and that's why when sometimes I wonder if the word journalist, citizen journalist is accurate, because journalists are trained, right? Although I recognize that you said now that there's a need to train citizen journalists, but the title journalist is earned. No, journalism is a science of verification. So if you take a picture, just like all the examples that Joyce showed, it's a picture. It's a scene of one situation, and you do not know all the data. So that if it's a little unfair, for example, to say that it was a citizen journalist who first broke. He posted a picture and said that there was a blast. Yes, that is a fact from his point of view, but it doesn't give the entire picture.
Context, ma'am, no.
Yes, so it does. So when I was a director of CNN. I look at it and I said, he heard a bomb. Baka may pumutok na balloon. Baka may, di ba? Of course, thank you for the tip, right? So you check it out. And that will take time. So kami always say, di baling huli, basta tama. Diba? It's not the speed, but the correctness of your story. And when I'm given something like that, with even a stringer, a journalist may training na, I have to check kung tama ba yung facts niya. And of course, there have been many instances where citizen journalists was tama. Pero I treat it as more as a tip than a story, because if it involves news, if it involves facts, of course, if it's the example of Weng na isang merong nipahat na ganito ganyan, yeah, okay, so it's a human interest story, yeah, okay, it poses no danger. But like, for example, yung Davao bombing, when it broke, that was gabing-gabi na yun eh. When it broke, I issued a editorial guidance, wag mong tatawaging terrorist attack yan ah. Because you don't know. There's a difference between terrorist attack and just a criminal.
Rojas Market blast yun, ma'am, no?
Yeah. So we were very careful not to call that a terrorist attack. Kasi merong event reporting lang. Merong sumabog, merong ganyan. But that's all. You cannot go any deeper than that. There's also the case of dun sa, ano ba yung hotel na yung guy who shot everybody kasi natalo pala siya sa
Resorts World.
Pero everybody was saying, oh my God, ina-atake na yung right in the city. There's a terrorist. See? Pero you can break it and say there's this something that's happening. CNN is very famous for breaking news, but it doesn't go beyond just the surface facts initially. And we have a famous line that says, we will give you more data as we get them. No? So I do believe so. As an editor, I would treat, generally speaking, on a mababaw basis, yung mga inputs ng citizen as something to be checked. It's a tip, but you cannot go with it. You cannot go with it just like that. It has to be, as journalists, it's our duty to verify. It's our duty to make sure that we're not giving false information, no matter how unwittingly, you do not want to exactly, give false information. Diba? I remember noon yung kuya kong buisit, sinasabi niya sa akin, bakit ka pa mag-journalism? Sabi niya, yung mga taxi driver, reporter din yan. Yung mga madaling araw nagre-report. Sabi niya, excuse me, hindi kami taxi. Anybody can say that's what he's saying. But no, journalism is different, and journalists are trained, and that's why we have a course called AB journalism. You studied for 4 years, and you're qualified, right?
Ma'am Tres, sorry, I have a question for you. You're not sold to the idea of citizen journalism. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying I'm not sold. We need all the information. I'm just saying you cannot
verify.
Yes, as journalists and as an editor in the newsroom, I cannot simply go with a tip, with a citizen journalist saying may bomba. Sigurado ka bang bomba? May pumutok. May difference, di ba? May pumutok.
Yeah.
Pero bomba ba yun? Di ba? So, we have to
Ariel?
be very...
Yeah. Yes, Wayne.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Okay.
Na somebody posting a picture in his Facebook account doesn't make him a journalist. No?
Yeah.
So, may process pa rin eh. It's journalism because there's a process. And the big part of that process is verification. Kaya para sa akin, yung citizen journalism, it should be a platform na dapat pangunahan pa rin ng news organization. Tapos kailangan i-define pa din natin kung sino yung matatawag mong citizen journalist. Give the example of the Marathon Boston bombing. I was talking about the potential of citizen journalism. Kasi nandun sila yung usually nasa mga communities. So they have that capacity, no? Pwede silang magbigay ng information. But the information still has to be processed. So pag tinag ka nung isang nag-post, it doesn't make you a journalist, doesn't make you a citizen journalist.
Yeah.
Ano rin talaga, tama yun, hindi siya, ano pa rin siya, no? May verification pa rin na ginagawa.
Vetting.
Even the people that have already been for several years, no, giving us stories, asahan mo na yan, halimbawa, meron kaming bayan patroller, no, na tinatawag sa Mindoro. Alam niya na kapag nag-declare na ng ganitong ng bagyo, marami nang may stranded, titingnan niya na yung sitwasyon sa pantalan, magpapadala na siya ng video. Pero still, i-verify mo pa rin anong oras niya kinuhanan kasi that may be valid at the time when the video was taken, but a few hours later, hindi na siya. By the time hindi na siya ganun. So meron pa rin verification o meron process pa rin talaga na kailangang pagdaanan. Matagal ng tao yan na nagpapagawa sa inyo.
Meron akong question, Joyce, for Weng. How do you think will citizen journalism reinforce newsroom operation or vice versa? And posible ba siyang i-harness yung power ng citizen journalism to curb disinformation, malinformation, tsaka yung misinformation?
Sorry, ano yung una mong question?
Paano ma-reinforce yung nakaka-reinforce ang citizen journalists in newsroom operations or vice versa?
Yung the way we see it, no, yung citizen journalism is a way to encourage people to participate in their communities. More involved sa what's happening in their communities.
Yes.
Kaya ganun yung concept niya. Kaya siya bayan mo, ipatrol mo. So kung anong problema dyan, i-report mo para mabigyan siya ng pansin, hopefully ma-report, but also after being verified. Kasi kung madalas naman, wala rin naman sila sa posisyon, no, para tawagan si mayor at itanong bakit ganyan yung reply. So yung newsroom na yung tutulong and a dedicated team, no, to do that.
Can I raise another
dapat i-publish.
Yung
can I just
second
raise another point?
Sige ma'am, go ahead. Oo. Wag na masyadong mahaba ha.
Just one point lang. No?
Okay. Yes po, go ahead.
I also want to find out kung ano talaga ba yung policy, ano yung tamang policy when we use material from citizen journalists. Like for example, mabawa nung nag-break yung COVID, no? Wala naman nag-shutdown na ang what's the name of that town in China, I forget na. But anyway,
Wuhan.
Yeah. Hindi makapunta doon yung mga tao kahit gusto mo magpadala. So ang umaasa lang yung newsrooms dun sa mga Pilipino na nandun sa Wuhan. So nagre-report sila. And then there was this issue about whether or not nagre-reklamo yung citizen journalist, yung citizen na to na, or source na to na nagbigay ng video, etc. Dahil dapat yata binabayaran sila. Kasi they served as journalists. What do you think about that, Weng?
Good question.
Kapag ka merong ang nagre-request ng payment, then nire-refer namin sila dun sa online platform kasi sila yung merong talagang nagbabayad sila for contributions. Kung papasok siya dun sa bayan mo ipatrol mo, na iba naman yung orientation niya kasi once you pay, parang iba yung magiging relationship eh. So hindi na siya community involved yung hinahanap mo, but it becomes transaction.
Transactional na.
Na siya, 'di ba? Nagbenta ka na ng material,
'di ba? Naging issue 'yun,
kapag sinabi niya na gusto niyo ng pay, i-refer namin siya sa Kila June Sepe na problema 'yun. Namin sila sa platform o sa online.
I think you just have to be very clear dun sa parameters, Are you tapping it as a citizen join? Or are you tapping that person as a streamer? Kasi iba ang arrangement, syempre.
Para walang kalituhan, we crafted yung unang kausap mo pa lang, sinasabi mo na ito yan, para yan sa bayan mo ipatrol mo, this is a voluntary blah blah blah. Ito po yung gusto naming sanang i-produce dun sa magmula sa video niyo and photo niyo. So from the onset, klaro siya.
Klaro na. Yeah.
May question lang sa
reply. Pag ang sagot ay gusto nila ng then we refer it to the newsroom, to the desk. And meron ng instances na talaga bang nagbayad sila.
Nagbayad naman talaga, oo.
Yung area na sobrang importante, then
I understand. When I'm not saying na useless yung citizen journalists. I'm not saying that they don't have access and yes, they have usefulness. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if they are their material is going to be used by a news agency, the news agency becomes responsible for the material.
Yes.
So that when they
nawawala
si Ma'am.
Balikan natin.
Joyce, yung pangalawang tanong ko, mabilisan lang from Weng. Kasi, paano natin pwedeng i-harness yun? Kasi we're talking about critical mass ngayon na uma-attend sa seminar natin. And we're talking about really fighting disinformation and malinformation. And then you have citizen journalists, a lot of them in the country, that can be used para fight, diba?
Oo. Sila mismo kasi dahil citizen journalist sila, inaasa mo na sila yung madalas na nasa social media. So just making them aware about the issue and giving them the tools na paano mag-verify, magtingin ng ano yung fake, ano yung totoo. Malaking bagay na yun eh. That's already one way of fighting disinformation. Kasi sila mismo becomes part of an army na pwede mong gamitin against this info.
Saka pag pinost lang kasi ng citizen journalist, siya lang yung responsible for his content. But in terms of pag ginamit na yan ng newsroom, hindi lang we have to vet it. Hindi lang ikaw yung kasama dun sa responsibilidad nung storya. Like yung sa Abbottabad, nung pinatay si Osama bin Laden, that was a citizen journalist. He just said that, I just heard butukan here, there, and everywhere, here in the... And it turned out that he was correct. That was when they killed Osama bin Laden, right? Pero hindi yun pwedeng gamitin ng CNN as is. No, kasi pag ginamit yun it becomes CNN material and and becomes responsible for that entire story.
Yeah.
That's all. I do not mean to put down citizen journalists. I'm not, I'm just saying that it.
Sure. Of course, Ma'am Tres.
Be one or the other. It comes up to a different level pag ginamit na siya ng isang news organization.
Correct.
And you become responsible for whatever material you publish.
That's right. Ako yung pag ginamit ko yan, ako ang haharap sa korte.
There's a question here sa chat box is also interesting, kasi we've always said that in a way, having all these social media instant feedback, because of the online platform, it democratized the news process in a way, because now it's not just us telling the people this is what's important to you, but also the people telling us, oy, ito rin yung importante sa amin and pakinggan nyo rin kami. Pero ang tanong dito, yung mga nagwa-viral daw po ba na post, ito raw ba ay form of journalism? At hindi ba ito minsan nakakabawas or nakaka-erode din sa totoong trabaho ng journalist, because we keep on running after this viral post kahit na mababa naman ang news value?
Para sa akin, hindi siya necessarily journalism. No. So viral doesn't equal journalism, doesn't equal newsworthy. So, hindi doesn't mean that you're a journalist. As tama si Tres, I fully agree. May process, may verification na dapat nangyayari. Kaya yung using citizen journalism ng mga news organization, yun yung mas maganda. Kasi you're applying the principles, the processes that journalism has dun sa pwedeng ibigay na information ng citizen journalism. So yun yung mas ideal na situation. Siyempre, pinaka-ideal yung kaya niyong bayaran lahat, diba? Mas maganda yan para sa lahat. Pero kung hindi ganun yung nangyayari, I think the fact that you are able to make them more involved in what's happening in their communities, I think malaking bagay na yun.
They also become stakeholders in their communities. Although yes, we fully agree with Tres that we still need to verify that responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of media sa ating news desk ang pag-verify. But we also do not discount the big contribution naman of information, photos, videos. Yeah. Lalo na pag sa panahon ng sakuna, dito talaga lumalabas. Kasi hindi naman, diba sabi natin, patay na si Nostradamus. Hindi naman ma-predict ng journalist na magsasabog ng vulkan, magkaka-tsunami sa Thailand. Ang unang-una talagang kukuha ng photos doon ay yung mga mismong survivors.
People on the ground.
Natural disasters, yes. September 11, wala namang nakahula na may biglang kasalpok na airplane doon sa World Trade Center. So ang unang-unang kumuha talaga ng photos doon are the people on the ground, diba? Even the photo of that falling man, parang swinerte lang yun na ando doon yung report, yung photographer Pero
but we just have to make sure na tama yung picture. Kasi like, itong latest, yung si Odette, ang daming picture na lumabas, pero picture nung Kendo.
Yeah. May comment sila. May mga comments tayo sa...
I came across sa photo na ganyan. Oo.
That's what I mean. And pag ginawa mo kasi yun, mananagot yung mga editors.
True. Yeah.
So in all things, always verify, always fact check. Hindi po yan nawawala. Pag sinabihan kang naulan sa labas, ay buksan niyo yung bintana nyo. Tingnan niyo kung umuulan, huwag kayo maniwala kaagad. Sabi nga ni Julie Alipala, binabalikan daw yung mga shared photos and videos. You don't consume them immediately and as is. Responsibility to fact check, yes. Yeah, it reminds her daw of the particular incident yung nag-release ng maling information ng AFP. Tapos nanggaling sa citizen yung data. Sabi naman ni Walter Balane, sorry, last na to and then I'll go to you, Ariel. Sabi ni Walter, gone are the days that only journalists can verify. But yes, verify or maybe provide information. Kasi yung verification, medyo proseso yun not always present from our citizens, ano. But journalists have to factor in that they can use citizen reports as tips for possible stories. Yes. Ariel, you were saying something. Sorry.
Yun nga with the forthcoming elections kasi dapat mas discerning pa yung ating citizens,
yes.
ano, while we appreciate their power and their, responsibility din nila, they think, no, they're responsible, merong responsibility sa society, kailangan pa igtingin pa kasi ang daming kumakalat na misinformation, disinformation na magko-confuse sa public more and more. Binanggit kanina yung babalik-balikan yung mga photos, babalik-balikan, tapos i-reframe, tapos papaniwala ng tao. The reason why the practical tips na bigay ni Joyce, tapos andyan si Weng, andyan sila Ipe, etc., sila Christian, na naging bahagi ngayon ng ating program. Go, Joyce.
Yeah. So actually, wala na tayong questions.
Yeah.
So we will likely end our discussion here. But I just want to point out, lahat ito ay tahi-tahi. Ito ay interconnected. We are in the middle of a pandemic. It's become difficult for journalists to do our job properly and do it well. It does not excuse us from not doing our jobs. But, we also encourage citizens kasi kung hindi lahat kaya na nating papuntahan ng coverage, di ba? Maraming rason. Kulang sa finances, takot sa pandemya, etc., etc. Kaya more and more, tayo ay tumitingin sa mga pinupost ng mga citizens natin, sa mga nire-report nila. And kung hindi man natin mapagkatiwalaan, let us vaccinate, let us inoculate our citizens with fact-checking tools para naman sila ay makapag-produce ng mas tama or mas dekalidad na information which our media naman will use eventually. So ayun, sana ay marami kayong natutunan. Thank you, Weng, for joining us. Ipe and Christian, if they're still with us, maraming salamat. Meron pa yatang isang nag-chat. Hindi. Nag-comment lang si Mistress. So ayun, thank you so much for joining us in our Scholastic, the first Scholastic event of PPI here in NCR for NCR schools. And we should ask our friends, our students and our members of the academy who are with us today, please fill up the survey form. Well, I think it will be placed sa ating chat box.
Posting it in the chat room.
Yeah, we'll be posting it sa chat box. Paki-fill up po, and we'd also like to request you to like the PPI and Seidel Foundation Facebook pages. Paki-check po and please like them and please follow us on Facebook as well.
And Twitter.
And yun, did I forget anything on Twitter? Yes, of course. Twitter.
Yeah, meron tayong reminder. Thanks very much, Joyce. True to its form, sabi ko kanina, di ba sabi, I was hopeful it's going to be insightful, and it was an insightful and interesting discussion like we always do sa regular programs natin. Only those who participated in the meeting room will get their certificates, and only those who will answer the survey question or evaluation form will get their certificates as well. So this is a kind reminder for our next batch of participants, particularly in Bulacan or Luzon. On January 31, we'll be doing 12. Pag ginawa natin yung Bulacan, we still have 10 more, and hopefully we can do more. Pag natapos natin yung 8 dozen of the Scholastic programs this year. Thanks very much for joining us today. Again, please do not forget to visit the pages of PPA Seidel Foundation for more announcements on our programs. Hindi lang Scholastic, meron pa kami media seminar, etc. Pilinay namin yan kanina earlier before the program, and thanks very much for joining us today. Sa ating discussion ngayon, hindi na maipagkakailan na maraming difficulties sa pinagdadaanan ng ating journalists. At dahil hindi lang ito pandemic, dahil madaming factors to be considered, we're looking at the post-pandemic na mas maayos sana for us journalists, for the industry, but at the same time, we enjoin the public, our audiences, to support journalism in the Philippines, or journalism for that matter worldwide, dahil ito ang isang critical or crucial na pamamaraan para maging maayos tayong citizens ng ating bansa, because a well-informed citizenry is an empowered citizenry. Thank you so much, Seidel Foundation, Joyce, Weng, Christian, and Ipe, and also Ma'am Tres for your wonderful contribution to the open forum. Thanks very much, everyone. keep safe pa rin, and see you next time. Bye-bye!
Bye, everyone!
Bye, everyone!
Ariel, may request sa chat box.
Ay, bakit? Ano yun?
Baka daw pwedeng umulit ang NCR kasi naka-health break daw karamihan.
Oh, meron tayo. Okay, sige, habang nandiyan pa kayo.
Habang andito pa tayo.
Andito pa tayo lahat. Okay, hindi na siya recorded. Pero,
Hindi na to
as I
recorded.
said, we're actually doing 12 this year. Meron